Go live! Hello everyone. Right then, let's see if this is working. How's the mic doing? Okay, so I've been having lots of fun with the mic. I'm going to announce that now. It kept causing me trouble in recording yesterday, and it's caused issues, and I've tried replacing the cable, I've tried fixing it, and if I pick it up, I'm hoping it still works after I show it to you, but this has started wiggling about, which it's not supposed to. And there appears to be more issues. So I'm guessing what happened is I didn't think it had got damaged about a week or so ago, maybe a little bit longer, when a certain fluffy research assistant was wandering around and managed to bop it with his tail. Now, of course, I do have a boom I used to have him up on, and I would prefer to have it up on boom, but at the moment, with the way the monitors are mounted, because I think monitors are mounted, and the fact that I cannot get the boom on the front or the sides of the desk, it has to go on the back of the desk. It can't reach over the monitors where they are and actually pick up good sound. It just causes trouble and keeps hitting the window and all the other things. So that's why I'm not using the boom. I think what I'm going to have to do is, if I'm going to be staying in here for for a lot longer, I'm probably going to have to get a monitor stand, because the monitor's currently on the desk, to raise them up, and the monitor stand will come with a boom attachment that I can have a boom come down. And I'll hopefully prevent this happening again. But because that's mucking about, I have actually ordered a new mic, because frankly it was causing me too much trouble, and it kept going wrong and kept interfering with recordings. So I will admit that I have stuck with Razer. I think I've gone with the V2 Pro rather than Siren Elite, because I read things and basically it said that the V2 Pro is a newer and slightly better one. So I haven't quite got the same again, but I've got something similar. And I've got a KFC for lunch. And I've got Iron Brew in the fridge, because that finally got delivered. And we have got one book we're going through today. Only one book only, because Battleships and Battlecruisers 1905-1970. Now, I remembered this book because I'd had it before, and then a student had borrowed and never come back with it. And I remember there were lots of interesting things in there. And I also remember there are problems in it. But it's often a source of things. And one of the troubles with it, and I would say this is a trouble with it, is that you go and look at the sources and the bibliography list. And it has a great source list. But I can't help but notice that some of them are awfully interesting sources in terms of their quality, although it itself is very good. And one of the things about it being very good is it does have a lot of excellent drawings in it, which I really do enjoy. But, and I'm looking for the actual specific example I was going to give of why I consider it to be a variable quality. In that, whilst the drawings are very good and the technical details are often very accurate, there is some interesting stuff included in historical stuff, which is not quite, how do I put this politely without also being too rude, not quite kosher. If we go for an example, look in the Royal Navy vessels sections, and this is where I'm going to, you will find listed in here a St. Andrew class battleships with St. Andrew, St. David, St. George and St. Patrick as the names for them for the N3s. And yet at the same time they do not have names for the battle cruisers. So the battle cruisers which are actually under construction, we don't know the names of in this book. But the battleships which aren't under construction, which haven't been ordered yet, apparently they have 4 names, and they've gone for 4 Saint names, most of which, as I've shown before, were never used before and were never used as a rule for battleships. I somehow doubt that, but this is a source which is often cited for that reason. It shows it was going to be 4 saints. Well, no. What it does is it shows that someone had told this particular officer who they trusted that it was going to be, but that person was probably talking out of their behind. And it shows the problem for all academics and all historians and all people who do this writing, in that we are only as good as the sources we have. And so that's so and also at some point, if you suddenly stop hearing me talking, it's not because I've pressed anything, it's because of the mic. Just put a message in the chat and go, Alex, we can't hear you. Right then, I'm going to say hello to people now. I'm just getting myself some iron brew. And I have seen all the questions. I have the Q&A section out so I can see the questions. And I'll put the Q&A show up on the screen. So, add source. I think that's the questions. That is the questions. Oh, that's going to be a bit too big. Let's do that. Yeah, that's better. Hello. Right then, let's go through the live chat. Yes, a historian is a professional sorcerer. Or a professional saucer. Hi, how's for them? Now, Jacob. Now, Doc stayed too long on Twitch playing UED. 40 minutes after he said he was ending, and he was still there, and still had to order food. We tried to scare him away, but he was recreating a Queen Elizabeth class. The Fluffs were definitely keen on holding me in. The 6:45 time was a YouTube glitch. I have no idea. I usually work to a 7 o'clock start, and I put this back to 7:30, but for some reason it hadn't put this one back to 7:30. So probably maybe I put it in, but what's really funny was when I logged into this one, it didn't have the right title or anything, and then suddenly it had the right title and it was on the right 7:30. So I went, no idea. Yes, my sister did cook again today, and hence I'm having KFC. I love her dearly, but I'm having KFC. Hi, Safford. And it was also waiting for the food to be delivered. I was offering the last of iron brew today, but it's sugar-free. It's like serving spaghetti broken in half. You do not serve spaghetti broken in half. You do not serve sugar-free iron brew. I swear that cannot be manufactured in Scotland, that's iron brew extra, because in the nicest way, it's sacrilege. They said I ordered iron brew. They said they actually refunded. This is the thing. I actually got a note of apology from Deliveroo when I told them I got iron brew extra rather than iron brew. They actually sent me a note of apology. This is the joy of life. It's considered that bad. Hi, Blackburn. Hello, H for done. Hello, Jack Ray. Hello, Runon. Hello, Jacob. Hello, H for done. Hello, Mark Hartness, Team Locker, Duke of Petchington, Melanie 640. Hello. Hello, Steve Richards. Hello, everyone, basically. Michael Cooch. Hello. Hello, Glenn Stewart. Hello, Bob Fry. Hello, Wayne. Hello, Andreas. Hello, Joss Funk. Hello, Blackburn Maximus. Hello, Abzaski. Hello, Michael Cavello. Hello, everyone. Okay, now so, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the Kriegsmarine lost 2 cruisers, 2 battleships, 3... Well, is that the Kaiserlich Marina? 2 cruisers, 2 battleships, 3 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers to British aircraft to carry it. Nah, it'll be the Kriegsmarine. Attacks by 1940. Then Graf Zeppelin, both their last 2 battleships and 1 more cruiser by the end of 41. Aren't the KM now, Kriegsmarine now stuffed? The Kriegsmarine don't exist. In the nicest way, the Kriegsmarine don't exist as a surface force. Look, I'm watching the newest episode of Star Trek Into Strange New Worlds, and I was wondering how common was singing in the ships during deployment in the previous century. Quite common. There's usually quite a lot of singing going on. There's a lot of entertainment usually put on in the evenings. Remember, crews are stuck away from home for a long time. Singing is a fairly easy way to get through things and have a bit of an entertainment in the evening, if someone can sing. And also it's fairly good for things like synchronizing movements. So if you're hauling ropes, etc., singing. If a crew sees they have taken the gun opposite them out, do they adjust the angle to aim for the one to the right or left, or go to the next gunny deck? They don't really have that much angle advantage, because if you try and slant the gun this way, that way, you have to manually move it and manually adjust it. And it's a lot of weight, and you don't have any pulley systems, etc. You can't do it. You just keep blasting away. If you've taken out the gun, obviously, perhaps you elevate your gun a bit to fire down at the gun below, or maybe you raise it up to fire up at the shrouds, but you are not going to angle it in terms of left to right or port to starboard. Actually, if you have a first rate shooting a third rate, are the upper the gun deck 12-pounders shooting up the main gun deck along with the other guns, or on the roll, or is it the quarter deck for a boarding action? They will be first will be seeking to wipe out the top. They'll blast across the top, and then they might well load versions of shrapnel, basically, and turn their guns into massive shotguns to wipe out the top, or they might carry on firing down into the ship. And also you have to remember, ships don't sit there level. The waves are going up all the time, they're angling, the ship's doing... So, whilst you might theoretically be higher and able to fire over, you might actually find if you're in a trough of wave, you're actually level them. So, you keep firing. Nice turn. How much trouble is Graf Spain if she has to face Ajax, Achilles, Exeter, Cumberland, and a Colossus-class light carrier? Well, it's going to sound strange, but the Colossus-class light carrier is probably going to slow her down to the point at which she's going to have to face Cumberland. And let's be honest, the Germans themselves estimated they'd be stuffed if they had to face Cumberland. She was very, very annoyed having missed her. But Cumberland with Achilles, Exeter, and Ajax as support staff, she's gone. You just add Cumberland into that fight, she's gone. You add in a Colossus-class light carrier, then there's enough air support that she's taken out the opponents. Black Moses, in the spirit of KFC, what if the British decided to buy Illinois and Kentucky instead of finishing Vanguard, and use the scrap to help build the multi-class carriers? Or just use the stuff to build them? The British could end up with 2 very fast battle groups. It'd be useful. I doubt they'd do it, but it'd be very interesting to have. And also then they'd have those 2 Iowas. And whilst, yes, they're massive battleships and they require a lot of crew to maintain, you probably have had them hang around for longer, because A, they would have been able to work with their American counterparts, or you'd be able to use the same parts of them. And B, you'd have been able to, it would have been another sign of Anglo-American friendship that they existed. But I doubt it would ever happen, because national pride, build your own battleships. For H3As, give me a second to check which of the H3As. Which one is it? I do have a link somewhere which has the whole G3 to... Let's just do an image search. Let's just do an image search. That's probably easier. And where I find the correct images, I will start going through them. No. I found the right one. Right, and we are at L2, H1 is what we're looking for. K3, and that was it K3 you said, or H3? It was H3. J, am I too far along? H3A. Ah, cute. D6. Oh. 6 18-inch guns in 2 triple turrets. If they built those, then probably they have to let them through. But it's going to have an impact on everything else. So if the RN has those in service, they're extremely powerful vessels. For starters, the upper limit of guns is going to become 18-inch guns, and the tonnage is going to become probably 40,000 tons in standard. Melanie, please keep a track on Dan. This is why I have you. I think you have you two as the same status on this system. If I don't, tell me. I'll make sure you are. You balance Dan out. Hello, Rapper back. Hope you're having a nice time then on holiday. Nightbot didn't back. No, Nightbot didn't. Nightbot hasn't been working that well recently, I think. Right. Let's go to the chat, into the questions. Manfred, naval diesels, do they run out of run on salt of diesel that fuel bond puts in a car, or is it the same bunker fuel is used in an engine running on a diesel cycle? Pretty much the latter option. The latter option. It's interesting. Nice one. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if the cruise... Yeah, I've answered that one. Yes, nice one. What change in the treaty and RN carrier doctrine do you see if the illustrious class certified? Okay. Nice to go for one. Right then, you've got a 1 of 2 question up there, and then you've got, as your second one off that, is a illustrious question. So, I know you've got a lot of questions saved up, but can you make sure when you put them in, they're not jumping around, because it's just confusing me. My coach, Candy class or Town class? Which opponent would ski most if you were a Kriegsmarine Marine Surface Raider? Honestly, I don't want to take on either, but the Town class is going to deluge me in shells. And blind me, and then probably get close and torpedo me. A County class is going to pummel me. Depends what surface radar I am, though. If I'm Bismarck, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to shrug them off and beat them up. If I'm Tirpitz, the same. Scharnhorst and Eisenhower, pretty much the same of it. If I'm one of their heavy cruisers, the Deutschland class, I'd rather avoid them. But even more annoying than actually fighting them is the fact that they're going to be on the radio calling out my position and calling in friends. I'm just asking questions from the canon video. So how do powder monkeys get picked for progression? Is it the captain and petty officer picking them? It depends on the rank. It depends on what sort of level you're talking about. But after they get a certain amount of age, they'll get promoted. Once you achieve a certain level of size and bulk, you can become a sailor. You'll be a sailor. So it's sort of age and size dependent. Do you have a recommendation for a book about T-class destroyers, Type 25 frigates? Not really for Type 25 frigates. There isn't really a good book on that, as I can remember from memory. What change in the treaty or RN carrier doctrine do you need to have an illustrious class at 32 knots, 24,500 tons of capacity of 68 aircraft? Basically, you need. Well, the British would have loved to have a ship that big, but you need to have a scenario where they can get the necessary carriers. If you look at it, the Americans and everyone works it out, and 27,500 tons gives you 5 carriers on 135,000 tons. The British, they work out they can get roughly 6 at 22,500 tons. So they can get 6. They need at least 6 carriers. So if you want 6 carriers of 25,000 tons, you need 150,000 tons worth of displacement. So basically you need a treaty limit of a carrier of 30,000 tons and allowed 5 of them. So everyone has a treaty limit of 150,000 tons. And then the British will probably build one to 6 or 25,000 tons. Yes, if if the Kriegsmarine are basically smacked and the Italians are tarantoed by a massive, overwhelming RN strike, then the RN can shift a lot of forces to Pacific, which they weren't historically able to do. Or rather, they can shift them to the Indian Ocean and therefore from thenceforth into the Pacific a lot earlier. And if they get to the Indian Ocean, if Force C when it deploys has aircraft carriers, has those things, then the odds of Force C getting Force Z'd is very unlikely, and the odds of Singapore falling to the forces which are arrayed against it are even less. So if it turns up and it's got 2 to 3 carriers with it and 4 or 5 fast capital ships, and it's got all the forces they could have deployed with it, then frankly Force C is probably going to start taking names quite quickly. And the Japanese, this is not to say the Japanese can't overwhelm that, and they can, but they put all their efforts into the strike on Pearl Harbor. They then need to withdraw, rearm, repair, get their ships ready, and then launch a massive strike on the British fleet. And by that time, the Americans and the 4C would probably have joined up together. So you'd have the American carriers, the British carriers, British fast capital ships, and all their whatever service groups they could have together, and it would be a very big battle, probably somewhere in the South China Sea, or possibly outside of the Philippines. It's going to depend where and how they meet up and who's in command of what. With the British bringing the same amount of aircraft carriers, but not probably the same amount of aircraft, but bringing also all the capital ships, the British will probably have command in charge of the overall task force, but they might put the joint carrier group under the command of an American. It would be an interesting one to see how it would do. Also in that scenario, you probably have someone like Cunningham sent out to command the fleet. So you could end up with the very real scenario of Cunningham and Nimitz working together to destroy the Japanese, and that would be definitely a unequal challenge for the Japanese, because Yamamoto is good, but he's no Cunningham and Nimitz. They are very, very good. They are basically once in a generation capabilities. I would say Yamamoto is probably fairly decent hab as well. But he's no Admiral Tojo. Honestly, nice area for what do the Kriegsmarine do if they have one Bismarck, one Scharnhorst, one Admiral Hipper, one Deutschland, one Königsberg, one Leipzig, 3 Type 9 and an extra these sort of destroyers by an M940? Well, they probably do what they did with them historically, which is deploy them around various parts of Europe to act as a fleet in being. Like my Maximus, if the London Naval Treaty allowed destroyers to be built to similar tonnage as of the French Gepard class destroyers, with increased tonnage taken into account, what would the other navies build? You're looking at talking about a far bigger Tribal class destroyer and probably a far bigger Fletcher. And the Japanese would just be building light cruisers. They call them destroyers. They claim their tonnage as destroyer tonnage, but it'd be light cruisers. God knows what the Italians would build. Probably something like the Romano, the Captain Romano class, which was, but slightly lighter. I don't know, what is the worst battleship or battlecruiser to convert into a carrier existing pre-dreads? HMS Dreadnought. She's the smallest and least viable to do so, of the British ones. I could start talking about the French ones, but frankly I don't want to. They are universally pretty bad for that. Let's go with Dreadnought. Let's just say Dreadnought. I have not heard whether Drac has survived that he doing the Spanish Armada food. I'm sure he will do. So anyway, what happened to the young lieutenant who verbally accosts the master of the ship? If it's the sailing master, he's probably going to have an interesting conversation with the captain, which will not last, which will not be a very good experience for him. If it's the master and commander of the ship, i.e. it's a qualified, if the ship's nicest way is a smaller ship where the commander is also the sailing master, and they don't have two, then that's the captain of the ship, and that's not a good survival experience either. My coach, early war mixed RN and US in carry force. How well but badly will the two Doctor of Doctors mesh? Well, the Americans will probably take over the day strikes. The British will probably take over the fighter coordination during the day. And the British force would concentrate on night strikes. So it would probably actually work quite well. But that's as long as both commanders will listen to each other and work with each other's abilities, rather than one trying to force the other to do their doctrine. But seeing as that's what happened in the USS Robin deployment, i.e. HMS Victorious, I am fairly certain that's what will happen realistically. Team Locker, could the two Nelson class battleships have been refitted with US 16-inch 50 Mark 7 guns on their existing turrets? Probably so much the guns, but in the nicest way, you then need to work on the shells and all the hoists and everything. And remember, the British designed them for a light shell, which was supposed to give them longer range and more power, but they worked out very quickly that they'd gone down the wrong pipeline. And the trouble is, once you've sunk into it, you can't easily move beyond it. Realistically, the improvement of it would have been the 16-inch gun, which was coming through for the Lion class, because that would have been adapted to the British style and could have been able to be put in, and would have come with development of the hoists and the lifts, because you're going to have to change everything. So pretty much you're going to have to rebuild the turret anyway. Theoretically there's enough space, but realistically you just build a whole new turret. The RN got the Seahawk 7 years earlier than it did in 1946. A year before the Sea Fury and 3 years before... 3 before the Attacker. Would the RN order the Sea Vampire? Would they still buy the Sea Fury and Attacker? Probably not the Sea Vampire, maybe the Sea Fury, not sure about the Attacker. Sea Fury is still going to be an all-weather cable aircraft. The Audace class were quite nice. So the 1971 Audace class, if they're the ones I'm thinking of, they're quite good. I thought it. Dan is one I can't time out. Yes, but you're balanced, so you can balance equal. I don't drink diet, I am brew. Steph Johnson, powder monkey, sailor, seaman, able seaman, boatswain, master of ship, according to the age, build, and brains. I believe was the order of things, Doctor, or am I mistaken? Roughly, yeah, there is also Killick in there. Killick is an interesting one. Let's put it this way. It's been around for a long time. But they're not sure exactly when it is around from. Because it's one of those bits of historical history. Leading sailor. When I get to go around the Gulf Coast Museums, I want to tag along. I would love that race parade as well. I was not sure if you saw it. If the Royal Navy had a fleet of 36 armoured cruisers, 94 protected cruisers, and 15 scout cruisers, when it comes time to race them, wouldn't the quite option of a small number of better cruisers be a more attractive option? Depends on what do they want to do. And what are you replacing them for? And you won't be replacing them all at once. That's the thing. You don't have all your fleet in service for 20 years and then go whoop, all out and then replace new ones. You replace them as a ongoing process of evolution. So, yeah, you might well have less or you might have more, actually. It's going to depend on what you need or the circumstances. My greens for today. Nathan, finally 10,000 subscribers. Yes, that is useful. Unfortunately, the bed is now 15,000 because my aunt thought she was getting too close last Christmas. And she won last Christmas, so... Jacob W5570. What would happen to the naval treaties of a minor nation not signing launching a ship that broke limits, like a bigger guns on a cruise or something? It's actually a point when a Deutschland comes into class come into existence, because of course they have 11-inch guns on basically a heavy cruiser hull. Realistically, that's what you have escalator clauses for. So that's when they're supposed to be implemented. And so the British and all nations could have implemented escalator clauses at that point. But they chose not to. But that's why you have the escalator clauses and eventually a break clause in the treaty system as well. If someone launches a massive... Basically, if the Soviet Union had actually started launching battleships, Japan's reason for breaking the treaty would have been gone, excuse me, Soviet Union building battleships, we've got history here. And everyone else going, yeah, we have to let you go. If the Sea Vixen looks pretty, but I have the impression it wasn't liked. Why? It was liked, but it was also difficult. It had a bit of a temperament, but more importantly, it had issues in terms of the observer's position, which for people like Michael Clarke, who are quite tall, was very, very tight. That's it for everyone. In the Hearts of Iron, AO, the fairy spearfish, despite likely flying in 1942, stayed until November 1943 to correct a problem with the aircraft's handling. And it's likely the same delay would have occurred if in reality had after the first flight of spearfish on the 5th of July 1945. Well, it's one of those questions which you can't really answer. How likely is with a similar delay in handling take a similar amount of time between a fictional aircraft and a real aircraft? If they're implemented at the same time under the same conditions, it's just... Does someone make the same mistake? Is it even a mistake? Is it someone made the same calculation and it looked okay on paper, and then in reality when they worked it out, it didn't work? There's no way to rhyme or reason that out. What if the Royal Canadian Navy went with the Type 42 destroyer design instead of the Iroquois class, and replaced Bonaventure with Free Invincible class? They'd probably also been operating the Harrier, which would have been a far larger fleet of Harriers. Honestly, Australia would probably have then copied the same route if that's what Canada did it, at least as far as the Invincible class go. Which could have had a very interesting impact on world cooperations if Britain and Australia and Canada all have 3 to 4 Invincible class carriers. Suddenly you have a lot more capabilities. You're going to have to... The trouble is, my mum doesn't want to make the bet involving me, but my aunt gets... Because my aunt wins, my aunt gets to set the terms of the bet. have multiple bets running at any one time, though. They're a fun family. It's you know, my family doesn't gamble apart from on each other. I am teriyaki KFC. No, I haven't tried that. Martin Harris. In the USA, the traditional original recipe can only be found in a restaurant called Claudius Sanders Dinner House, named for the Colonel's second wife. I bet those are a find. Why would... Okay. 96831. You've asked me a question, how is the Royal Navy affected if in 1940 Admiral Pound, Jude Hope was replaced by First Fleet Lord by Admiral Bruce Fraser? For starters, I'm not sure if Bruce Fraser is an Admiral at that point. I'm trying to remember, I think he's a Vice Admiral at that point. Secondly, there's a whole slew of Admirals in front of him in seniority, so that would be a massive problem. But thirdly, there is a whole slew of Admirals in front of him, so no, it's not happening. At that point in 1940, I'm fairly sure Bruce Fraser is the Vice Admiral and Third Sea Lord. So you're basically saying that the person who's Third Sea Lord would jump straight to First Sea Lord without having an active fleet command. That's not going to happen. The commander would either be Home Fleet, will be promoted, or Mediterranean Fleet. Especially in a wartime. So either Andrew Cunningham comes home and takes command early, or Home Fleet's commander gets a promotion. There's a few senior admirals in terms of Plymouth and Portsmouth naval commands around. They're usually kept there as a sort of ready reserve of senior officers. Almost to an extent, I think Admiral Ramsay is actually more senior than Fraser, so Ramsay's more likely to be promoted than Fraser, and Ramsay's by that point, depending on when in 1940 it happens, could well be far more senior rank. But there's also Max Horton wandering around, and Percy Noble, who's just back from the commander of Far East Fleet. So there's a lot of officers around. It's not Fraser. I know the Fleet Arm used and like the Martlet, but what about the Buffalo? I don't think they ever had the Buffalo. That was operated by the Australians. June Picture. Britain, Canada, and Australia having the same 2 to 4, let's call them light fleet carriers, and same type of escort hulls. Do I hear Jellicoe Plan 2.0? It would certainly be fun. Now, let's take everyone. You're asking me a question about the armaments of the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers. Now, whilst I would personally like them to have slightly heavier AA fit in terms of their gunnery, I do agree, broadly speaking, that it's more important that you have escorts, because if missiles are coming in there and using their close weapon systems, that means your outer air defense, i.e. your ability to strike at enemy air bases and intercept aircraft at longer range using airborne early warning and your own fighter aircraft, more importantly, has not worked. And your area air defense missiles by your principal escorts has not worked. Your point defense missiles by your close-in escorts has not worked. And you're now using your guns to protect you. So basically, There's a whole lot of options which should have gone through first. So yeah. Suddenly I think there's going to be a lot of people heading towards Shelby, Kentucky. Do you imagine we need 2 more Queen Elizabeth class carriers? It would be nice, but we're only got 2. Well, as First Sea Lord, he's got to promote the senior officers available. He's got to coordinate all of the strategy over the world and manage Winston Churchill. So what might he do? A lot of paperwork and a lot of arguing and meetings for Andrew Cunningham. Okay, why didn't the RN Coastal Command use airships in World War II? Long endurance, measured in days, and able to provide continuous cover, or the drawbacks that count against them? Infrastructure to support them, and the memory of the Hindenburg disaster. If the steam engines of Ulysses from Atlantis to the Lost Empire were available before World War I, what would this mean for submarines and other vessels? They would be a lot faster. And a lot more reliable. For the Erzat Yorks versus Renown question, Stephen Ritters, I will leave that till I'm doing the Erzat Yorks video. Which, if I'm not mistaken, is due to be recorded. I've got the Erzat Monarch class. They're due to be done for the 25th of August. Oh, the Erzat Yorks. Erzat Yorks are going to be out on the 4th of September. If 6 Vanguard and 3 Vanguard derivative carriers are completed, having been ordered in 1939 using turrets from the Isles, how does this force influence the Cold War? Well, it means the Royal Navy has 3 large carriers from the get-go. It's going to be pretty big ships, which means they probably don't need to do the Victorious, etc., dangling around stuff. Pardon me. Struggle with eating so quickly when I've, not had food all day because I've been stupid. I should have ordered this for lunch a long time ago instead of sorting out other things. Instead of... How does it affect the Cold War? Probably not as much as we'd like it to affect. The British might have a role in the east for longer. But those carriers would need replacing at about in the 1960s, possibly 1970s. What might be, it's going to sound strange, It's all depend on why they're attaining. Because if you're attaining 6 battleships and 3 fleet carriers, then you've got to have a reason to retain them, which means probably some of the Soviet battleships are being built. The Soviets have battleships. It depends how they're using them. If they keep using them wandering around the world, the British are going to keep using theirs wandering around the world, as are the Americans. And should the US going to consider adopting the Queen as a class or a nice little Italian landing ship dock to make up for loss of Bonhomme Richard as a currently but decently modern design? The Americans have production lines building ships. They are building ships. So yeah, it's annoying losing the Bonhomme Richard, but they've got new America class vessels coming into service, and they can use them. It's going to cause problems, the loss of an F-35 light carrier, but it's also not impossible to deal with. And the British, covering with the deployments of the Queen Elizabeth class to the Far East, are helping that. In the nicest way, if anyone has got an aircraft with those capabilities, i.e. the Gloucester F-534, then the Luftwaffe would, then they're all going to be in trouble in 1940-41. Would it be correct that the 4,000-pound payload of the Curtiss XS B3C and the 8,000-pound, I'm presuming, payload of the Douglas XTB-2 destroyer, probably about as far as dive bomber torpedo bomber could go? Certainly getting to the upper limits. Actually, with Leslie talking about his archery in the chat, I'm just going to ask a small question of Leslie. Have you been practicing with the kneeling archer in front of you? Because I know, or was it the prone archer in front of you when they're on the ground? Because I know you were having difficulty when you did your team competition with that, and because it was the first time. So have you been managing to get in the practice? Was the Mark 20 bidder anti-submarine warfare torpedo a weapon designed for World War II that came too late? It's certainly from that development period. If teak is unavailable, what would you do to? What do you use for ship decks in World War II? If teak's unavailable, what do you use? Remember, it's a wood coating, basically over a steel deck. So your choice is wood, what wood or not wood. Honestly, not wood might be easier, and it's you might end up actually using something like tar or road surfacing, which sounds strange to say, but there is an honest reason for it. If you're using sort of the bitumen, remember the coating you put on top of a road, it probably would create the same sort of surface for you, but would be fire resistant. And yes, it weighs more than teak, but it's in World War II. You're worried about the fire. and the water resistance. It could work. What's it called? Wasn't it right with bitumen with tar? Let's go for one. How plausible is it that fairy spearfish could have started development in 1936? It's not completely implausible. There could have been specification in 1936, but you need a couple of engine developments and some aerodynamics developments to line up properly. Bitumen. Probably just bitumen. Asbestos, no, that's not really something you want to use for a deck coating. It's too expensive and not the right materials. You need asbestos is used for heat proofing. Right then, I'm going to clean my hands quickly, and then I'm going to let them dry off to make sure that there's no stuff on the chemicals on them when I open the books. So, that's what I'm going to be doing now for a couple of seconds. Do apologise, but... Ow. What's the stuff they called they put on freighters that had some protection? Ooh. I completely forgot now. Nice area from a friend. I don't need to read out the whole that question that you just put into these three things. Dun dun dun. To say, was an example of what the RM planning in the 20s. It's certainly what the RM would have liked to have happened in the 20s. Although the RN wouldn't have liked the 7 York class. They'd have liked, you know, roughly 25 heavy cruisers. Let's be honest. Yeah, that's 23 plus 2 counties. So 27, 28 heavy cruisers would have been what the Royal Navy would prefer. Royal Navy would have loved 48, but you know, beggars can't be choosers. Just on, roads tend to melt when exposed to heat from a fire. Yeah, but it's kind of different explosions. Didn't they mount armor blessing being able to mold a shape, but actually made of concrete cement? I think it was concrete and cement. I think it was a version of concrete. Hi, New Echo 472, and hello, the Brock. Hello, John UK. And if I don't think everyone else there I've said hello to. Oh, and thank you. It's just flashed up. Thank you, Jack Ray, for the memberships you've added on today. It's one of those strange things. It's I get my regular beeps in terms of what my finances are like, and you know what my analytics of YouTube are, and yeah, it's kind of interesting because if I consider YouTube income alone, okay, so this is just money directly for YouTube. Oh, Tana Verka, and you've been a supporter for 12 months. Thank you. My monthly income, in terms of YouTube support of me, is I get roughly 30 quid a month from people who are doing super chats. YouTube Premium also accounts for roughly £30 a month. People watching ads accounts for roughly £90 a month. Memberships account for roughly £110 a month. And gifted memberships, which usually means vastly Jack Ray's gifting memberships, I will admit this one, usually accounts for roughly £140 a month in average monthly revenue. So memberships are roughly £250 out of my roughly £500 a month revenue from YouTube. Sometimes it goes higher, and it has peaked occasionally at £600, which is very nice when that happens a month. But yeah, memberships, half the monthly income from YouTube. It's one of the interesting things, because when I look at it, and I have to say it does amaze me in sort of the support, because the YouTube money goes straight into, I could give an example, the fact I've been able to buy a new microphone quite quickly because this one's playing me up and causing trouble, and the reason I've managed to get the books I have recently, and I managed to book in the research trip to the archives, etc., and go to those places, and the fact that I've actually managed to buy one of the photos, one of the 4 photos I need for the book, while still trying to pay off bills and sort out things and deal with the joys and vagrancies of university income, is entirely down to the Patreon and the YouTube income streams. If it wasn't for those, if it wasn't for your support, that wouldn't be possible, so thank you. After another 2 years, I want a decrease certificate from Dr. Clarke. Could start doing something like that. Duke mentioned, if the Royal and Merchant Navies order merchant vessels and destroyers from major dominions, would the Royal Navy continue construction of the Admirals? You need to give me a reasoning for why they're doing it, because probably not. But if you're talking about from an escort perspective, they're ordering the escorts of more merchant vessels from Dominions. They were ordering them from Dominions, and Dominions were trying to build some as well. Would they continue construction of the Admirals? No, the Admirals were pretty much stopped because they were mucked around with. If the Admirals... There is always the interesting thing of what happens if they don't muck about with the Admirals. If they, after Jutland, they instead of trying to reform them or change them, they crash build them. And they crash build the 4 Admirals as quickly as they can. And they leave upgrading and modifying them for the interwar years. They just build them to the original Admiral class spec. That's a really interesting scenario, because you could end up with 4 then. And the RN could leave World War One, and go, right then, we want to maintain the 4 admirals, we want to retain the 2 renowns, we want to retain the 5 Queen Elizabeths, the 5 five royal sovereigns. Oh, and we want at least 2 more battleships we can have, and so we can have 2 battle squadrons and 1 battle cruiser squadron, all of 6 ships. At which point the US Navy is probably going, excuse me, excuse me. No, I haven't watched Oppenheimer yet. I haven't managed to go to the cinema in ages. What kind of photos of flag class do you need? Imperial War Museum only photos. I need 5, because they are specific photos of specific ships, and they're the only ones I can find of them. Young Master Drakenfell has found, I think, 36 photos for me. So there's 5 from the Imperial War Museum, which are going to be the most expensive 5 of the lot. And then the remaining 19 photos I'm hoping to source in an archive trip up north. So I have to find, at some point, roughly $2,000 to go on a travel around the north. I've shown you the videos for that. So I have to go north, and at some point I will probably, while I'm travelling up there, probably say hi to Leslie, etc., and go, hello, I'm going to be in Newcastle or so and so this period. Do you fancy meeting up and saying hi? I might even buy you a burger if I'm feeling very generous. Scenario: could a modern container ship withstand a broadside of ship line like Victory? Can a modern container ship withstand that? It would depend on the range. But honestly, I don't see anything about them being designed with that kind of violence in mind. They might survive the first. I doubt they would survive the second hit. I doubt they would survive the second hit. So photos of a specific flag class, not photos of a flag class. Yeah, the trouble is there are some flag class I'm using as key examples of some of the history they did, and one of those photos, the vessel, there's only literally one photo around, and the Imperial War Museum has it. The problem with doing research and getting photo rights is that it cuts into chance you'll turn a profit. Yeah, but I would say you have to understand, if I wanted to produce the bare minimum of a book, I could do that quite easily. And I could use and abuse my position, which I am fortunate enough to have. And I do realise, that's the way, please, there's not a big head, but for an academic I have quite a large social media, etc. reach. I do understand that. And I could use and abuse that to sell such book and forward and push it and get it procured and therefore make maximum money. That's not me. That's not my style. When a book comes out, even especially a self-published book, it will be the best I can produce it to be. And if it breaks even, I'm happy. If it makes a profit, I'm ecstatic. But it will be the best quality book I can produce. And of that I have no doubt. Because that's my entire aim. Right then, the live chat has just lost the whole live chat. So I've now got to Jacob. I thought stuff owned by museums was considered public property. Yeah, no. It's not. The no entrance fee is lovely, but in London, etc., that's a no entrance fee because the taxpayer pays the bill. That's why they still take attendance numbers, so they can bid for the funding. Nice one. What concession to other treaty powers it would be for the Royal Navy to get 10 York, 2 New Zealand, and 18 County? I'll say 37. Here by 1939. I have no idea what a New Zealand class is. I'm presuming it's New Zealand version of a county class. Sorry, I have no idea. I've never heard of a New Zealand class. I'm presuming it's Hearts of Iron or something like that. And I would say, in the nicest way, if you're going to get the heavy cruisers, you need to get them before 1930, whilst the scenario is going that you're allowed to build as many as you like. In which case, I would also say, why buy Yorks when you can buy counties, because you can build as many as you like. So if you're going to get 30 heavy cruisers, you get 30 heavy cruisers before the 1930 treaty comes through. So 32 heavy cruisers, and then that's 320,000 tons of heavy cruiser. And if you've got the Hawkins as well, you can claim it's 360,000 tons of heavy cruiser, in which case you can claim you need matching allowance of light cruisers. In which case you probably can get roughly that. But the 37 Crown Colony by 1929, 16 data, you'd be talking about, again, you're wanting to build ships before, and nice way, that's nothing to do with treaties, that's to do with knowledge and experience and stuff, and what they're doing in terms of development. So you get the 36, you could get, whatever you get in terms of Leander class, Arafusers and towns probably prior to World War II, by 1939. So you get that 360,000 tons divided between those vessels. So that's what you'd have. You've talked in the past about 9.2-inch armed Hawkins class design. Do you have any pictures of it in specs? I don't have pictures of it. I have seen specs of it. Pictures of it I would have to draw up in UAD, based off the specs. That makes right. Shermack, if the Royal Navy was maintaining an all 15-inch battery with a battle line with 4 admirals and 2 renowns, you probably see a separation of battleship and battlecruiser and de facto no building holiday. Honestly, the British would be demanding that they still get to build 16-inch ships. If you're going to set a limit to 16-inch, the British are going to want 16-inch ships. So they'll still get Nelson and Rodney in that circumstance. But you might also get no battleship, battlecruiser. And also there's the fact, if all 4 admirals are completed and are in service, and they could be completed and in service, if you hadn't mucked around the design, you could have completed and had them in service by the end of World War I. That means you could have been building the next generation after. Which means you could have been building something G3-ish and have actually completed that by the 1920 treaty. So the British could have their 16-inch ships, they could be G3s. Or, well, they could be 16.5-inch gun ships. Which is what my strong suspicion is they would have been. So you're talking 9 16.5-inch guns. In which case the treaty limit might be a 16.5-inch gun ship, in which case there also might be 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 G3s around. So the Royal Navy, with the treaty limits, would be 4 G3s, 4 admirals, 2 renowns, and 5 Queen Elizabeths and 5 Royal Sovereigns. Which equals 10 battleships and 10 battlecruisers. 4 of which are edging along the battlecruiser to the fast battleship category, but are definitely not in the fast battleship category at that point. That's an interesting combination for the Royal Navy to have going into the 1930s. Thank you, Verdun. I know the Amsterdam Maritime Museum has a website with a lot of art which you use freely. Yeah, the Amsterdam Maritime Museum are nice. Richard, where would you put a 2.7 meter wide profile schematic vector for now? If I had one 2.7 meters, I'm trying to remember quite how wide my office is. I'm not sure if it is 2.7 meters. I think it's 2.7 meters in length, but I don't have space to book it. In my case, it would go up in probably in my bedroom at current points, but it depends when we move. Because as I said, the plan is we move and I get an annex accommodation. So I have a separate home within a home, if that makes sense. My own front door and those things. So I'm still there when they need me. Dan Freeman. Pricey about the yes, but Dan Freeman gets a side on the NHS because he's an NHS doctor, so he gets to talk about it. Everyone else sort of just has to keep quiet. Hi Richards, you're in the question section. So you're in the question saying hello everyone. Magnus, 90 quid for a full-size replica of the as-fitted 1940 schematics. Nice. Sure, I agree, but I think the USN would say we need battle cruisers and we need sick battle cruisers. How they shake it out exactly on it, but I don't think the US would just lie down. No, because yes, I agree. I agree. The problem would be the Royal Navy has 10 battle cruisers and 10 battleships at that point. I think there would be a very big issue of getting the treaties through. The RN might even be able to replace. RN might still. It might end up being. Well, for starters, that's 20 vessels. So you might get the 10-7 ratio for the Japanese, and the Americans wanting 20. But B, and this is the more interesting thing, you could get the Americans and the Brits, the Americans going, actually no, we need 25 ships. And the Brits going, alright, we're allowed 25 ships, so we're allowed another class of battleships as well to build 5 battleships, and you guys can finish off your ships, etc. to match in. And yeah, it could end up being a 5-3 ratio still for the Japanese rather than a 10-7 under that circumstances, but they would be allowed 15 capital ships at that point. So again, the Japanese, that would be a massive win, because if you consider their plan of being an 8-8 fleet, if they're getting 15 rather than 16, then that's enough of a victory that they can, go home happy. They might even be able to argue, can we have the 16? Can we have 16 ships? And it might well be a case of they're given enough of a deal to get. Well, let's see. What could it be? It could be a 3.2 ratio. So they get a 3.2 ratio, and that gives them 16 ships, and then they're happy. And America and Britain each have 25. But if you consider at that point, using the metrics, the standard tonnage would be something like 45,000 tons, and you'd be allowed 16.5-inch guns. Imagine the battleships the British would build with that metric, and imagine what the Americans would build with that metric for each of their final 5 ships, if they had to build 5 treaty-compliant battleships between 1922 and 1930. The Japanese could have afforded the 10-7 ratio. That wasn't the problem. A rampant, uncontrolled building program would have been a problem. 10-7 ratio, which they built up to, they could have afforded. Legit, could the UK or Japan actually manage to fund? Yes, they could. It's one of those things, there's a lot of people who write... How do I want to say this? Okay. Where is my British economic stats? There we go. There's the economic stats. Right then. So. Let's go with public finance, 570. So you want to have the 1920s. Okay. British government income in 1921. £1,426 million. Their income in 1922, £1,124 million. Income 1923, £914 million. Income 1924, £837 million. That's when they're putting taxes down. If we consider the property and tax income, that doesn't go down that much. Again, it's roughly 800. 1939, it goes up to 1,000 million again. 1940, 1,000 million, but basically it never drops below 800 million, even in 1935, which is the lowest, 804.6 million. So, let's consider total spending. Total gross expenditure in 1920. There we go. Total gross expenditure of the government in 1921, 1,188 million. 1,188 million. 1922, 1,070 million. 1923, 812 million. 1924, 748 million. 1925, 750.8 million. 1926, 776.1 million. And by the way, they've got 800 odd million income, and they're spending less than their income. So yeah, 1938 spending 909.4 million. Yeah, always got plenty of income in reserve. So what are they spending their money on? Let's consider their total defence spending in that period. In terms of defence, no, defence spending is not included in that one. Ah, there's defence expenditure. That's cute. So, the Navy in Let's see, the Navy has done all the building in 1906, was 33.3 million. The Navy in 1914 was 48.8 million. The Navy in 1912 was 42.9 million. The Navy in 1921 received 88.4 million, 1922 80.8 million, 2023 56.2 million. In fact, the lowest naval budget in the entirety of the 1920s and 30s was 1933 with a budget of 50 million. Other than that, it usually hovers around about 55, 56 million. So, with a total gross expenditure of well over 700 million and a total income of over 800 million, I'm sorry that didn't really get proper focus. Out, mosquito. I can't remember what mosquitoes are coming in now. I think it's gone. Yeah, they could have afforded it. Defence costs a lot of money. It's one of the things that's often pointed out is it's not World War One which breaks the British government and the British economy. It's not even the recession in World War One. It's the night of the Wall Street crash in World War One. It's World War One, Wall Street crash, World War Two, and then the government's economic policies in the late 1940s, early 1950s. Which lead to the downturn and stagnation in the 1960s and 70s, which lead to the issues in the 1980s, Thatcherism, which is pretty much trying to solve all the problems in one go, which is why it's absolutely interesting. And then we've gone into a seesaw policy since then. And if you want to give a good example of why you don't necessarily want to go in a seesaw policy, you have a look at the economy of West Germany followed by Germany, and what they've managed to continue on. And the problem is, I'd say the issue comes down to some sort of form of British exceptionalism, but leave that on one side. But it does mean a lot of people look back, take Keglin, look back and go, oh, we couldn't have afforded X, Y, or Z, and we could have. I want to give a good example. At no point when they are tuning up for World War II does anyone question the cost. They're just doing it. Hi, Steve. And could Japan afford the 8-8 plan? And the speed they were going to build it, they'd have probably achieved the 8-8 plan by about 1934. So yeah, they could have afforded it. How long would it be for Drac to run off with Rickloo if the French had kept her as a museum ship? He'd probably be trying. What are your thoughts on HMCS Prince Edward as an armed merchant cruiser? I prefer to try and keep away from armed merchant cruisers in my experience. So today we are doing pretty much one book, as said, one book only. And I've got some ideas about how to do this. But give me a second, because I'm plugging this in. Hello. Now, I'm going to add source, camera. That should be, that comes up. Da 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 da. So, now, for this to work, I need to turn on the light above me, which means I'm going to look weird, because I always do when I turn this light on. But it provides enough light for me to go through the book. So, it is on. I'm also going to apologise now because the angle is not going to be flattering for me nor my legs. You're also going to see that I did get some, I'm not sure what, over my legs earlier. I knew I should have changed my trousers. Let's get rid of that. So, hello. Yes, you are seeing the mucky part. This is the messy bit. But, yeah. Is it going to work, or is it going to freeze on me? It has helpfully frozen on me, I think. Oh, XSplit, you've frozen on me. That's always fun when you do that. That's working, but that's not working. Cami is having tech issues. Yes, it is. Good old XSplit has decided to have a panic attack. Right, that should be back and working. He says. It should be back and working. It's working. Woohoo! Yay, it's working! And I'm off into infinitum. So. No, the only way to unfrigate XSplit was for me to actually shut down XSplit and restart it. So that is what I had to do. So now, let me get the book. Now my theory and my desire to one day will be to do this actually regularly and do it like this on a regular basis. Because this is a very cool book, and it's a very cool way to analyse the books, is to do a display discussing them. Now, God knows what you're seeing in the rest of the room. Here you go, we've got a good example of the Queen Elizabeth class. Now, what I find interesting about this, as I said, this book, is some of the factors within it have some interesting details. Like, Agincourt, 1913, Devonport Ducard. What's been laid down as a 6th class in January 1915 and due to completion in October 1916. Order cancelled after outbreak of war. Now, I know for a fact she was laid down earlier than that. She was actually laid down and cancelled, physically under construction. So I know that's not the case. And also, it doesn't make the case when you're sort of looking at these and you're going, right, so this is order 1912, laid down 1913. Ordered, laid down 1913. Ordered 1912, laid down 1912. Ordered 1912, laid down 1912. We know when she was ordered. We know when she was laid down. We know 1913. Laying down in 1914, yes. Laying down 1915, that's a long time to wait. That would actually make it even more suspicious. So what am I saying about this book? It's a very good book. Even look at it. I would not be disappointed anyone having a copy of this book. Look at some of the details in there. It's got some excellent factors in there and excellent drawings to illustrate the ships. I'll be using illustrations from this book for a lot of videos to come. It's got some interesting stuff written in here about the Courageous class. But it's when it gets on to what we tend to talk about quite a bit, the unbuilt ships, the 1920s and 30s. This is going to be used. This lovely comparison, because let's be honest, it's the... shouldn't be holding a book like this, but it's best for this picture. It's the the scale, also the same scale, of HMS Incomparable versus the G3s, which are called the 1921 Battlecruiser layout. Please note again, he's using battlecruiser as 2 words. Yes. Battlecruiser. 2 words. And, yeah. But, again, he's saying intended names: invincible, inflexible, indomitable, and indefatigable. But he hasn't listed which ones. And again, I am absolutely certain not invincible. Again, it's one of those things. I keep looking at where does it come from, and it's probably the only person who would actually possibly have named these ships like this would be Jackie Fisher, and Jackie Fisher does spread out around a load of rumours. But no one else at this point is going to rename battle cruisers invincible, inflexible, indomitable, indefatigable, because these ships they've just lost ships which had these high names. They do not want to build new ones only to give them the same fate. You don't do that. And then he's got the St. Andrew class. So, whereas I would say that the names for these are uncertain, but I'm fairly certain they're admirals. And in fact, very, very certain they're admirals. Because this Anson, Howe, Rodney, and I have a feeling this class we're going to start off with a Nelson. Because the British get the HMS Nelson stuff from somewhere, and they have Rodney on tap already. So Rodney Nelson for the Nelrods makes sense. That stuff's all available. And I reckon these were also going to be admirals. These, what were they likely to be? Probably again admirals, not saints. Because as I've been over when going through this book, and this is what this is what you can do. Always good to do source analysis and compare. So right, we've got names here. Let's have a look. Make sure you don't see my thing about my car details, because that is private information. And so I'm just going to stick that there, looking at the book. We want Andrew, St. Andrew. PQRS would help if I remembered my alphabet more easily. St. Lawrence, St. Denis, St. David, St. Austell Bay, St. Albans. Ah yes, St. Andrew. So St. Andrew, if we are looking at St. Andrew here, was a first rate. Listed until 1756. No ship since then. 42 gun ship, 1622, wrecked in 1666. St. Andrew's unlikely. But St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, which is just gone independent. Remember, this is 1920, we're organising this. Let's have a look at the history of St. Patrick, shall we? In Royal Navy service. Well, we're looking for St. Patrick. We've got St. David here. St. David, 4th rate. Sorry, how's it? It's not really doing that well. I was focusing in on it. Okay. 4th rate. Tender for St. David. St. Patrick. Well, let's see. St. Patrick. A tank vessel, 1917 to 1923. So, well, that vessel would have needed to be renamed, and they would have renamed it. If they were going to use that for a battleship name, the first thing you'd have done is remove that from the vessel it's named for. 4th rate, These are not really named, and it's a country again which is going independent. So why are you naming it for their patron saint? What's it going to cause us trouble? It's just going to cause you trouble, and it also does sound very Catholic, because let's consider even St. George, patron saint of England, which you would expect, you know, because it's Britain, and we always like to be marketed as being British English dominated. You would expect that to be a fairly common name, and it's a first-class cruiser. It was a first rate, but that was sold in 1883. It's been a second rate. It's been another second rate. Discovery ship. First rate. But it's not exactly been given a constant usage. In fact, it's been kind of not really that popular, hasn't it? So no. I'm sorry, I'm not sure where he gets this idea from, but a lot of people do source back to this book. It's unlikely. So there we go. Right then, we've got the Nelson class then come up. All their lovely details, but what's far better than the history, the writing up, is this. There's a planned addition to funnel height there. Cool to know. Well, thank you. There's profiles. And there's all of this. N3, Dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India. I doubt that. Again, because imagine, it's kind of like having the patron saints. There's the reason for not having them because you don't use, that name isn't one of your major battleship names. There's a reason for not having it because, in a nice way, it's sounds very popish to the Royal Navy's mind, and there's also the fact that if you lose it, you're losing a representation of the nation as a whole. This is the trouble with things, also names like Invincible, etc. They're lovely illustrative names, but if they get sunk, it's a big propaganda issue. And it's the same as if you lost something like HMS Britannia or HMS St. George. That's a big representation to lose. The Royal Navy likes to go for... The Royal Navy's got far easier wins which will deliver the same level of impact in terms of name value, but not at the same cost if lost. If you lose HMS Nelson or HMS Rodney, that's not going to have the same national impact as the loss of HMS England or HMS Scotland. It's not going to have the same level of impact. But let's be honest, HMS Nelson and Rodney turning up have the same level of impact in terms of their name value, because of who they're named for, as HMS England and HMS Scotland. Neither class has HMS St. George and HMS Dragon in it, so they can spar. Here we have the King George V class. And the thing is, and this is another reason I point to the admirals, because if the Royal Navy at any point, the Royal Navy has a habit of storing names and then going back to use them again. So why the King George V class? Why aren't any saint names used in those? They built 5 of them. Could have been King George V, St. George, St. Patrick, St. David, St. Andrew. But no, it's King George V, Duke of York, Prince of Wales, Anson and Howe. Let's be honest. You know, it's even more of a confusing. It's Prince of Wales and Duke of York. We'll leave that to one side. And then the Lion class. Again, you know, why not saints there? Oh, no, they are Lion, Temeraire, Thunderer, Bellerophon, Conqueror. Notice what names are missing from this list. And the AI names, people then point, well, there are aircraft carriers which are given indefatigable. Yes, but none's given invincible. Illustrious, yes, but not invincible. Formidable, yes. Indomitable, yes. Not invincible. Indefatigable, yes. Implacable, yes. Formidable, yes. Victorious, yes. Not invincible. Vanguard. Again, could have been a saint name. Nope, Vanguard. So, yeah, I don't see it as likely, but this is one of the source books which people point to. And so, again, you start, sort of doing things. And looking for a source book like this. Official and semi-official reference material. We've got US Navy. We've got various Messrs. Crosps. Held various reports, plans held privately in Germany, Britain, USA, France, Netherlands, all these good stuff. You notice what I notice is missing from there? I've got US ONI stuff. I've got German stuff. I even have some French stuff. Don't have any listing of ADM, of UK National Archives. Oh, that's probably could be me being picky. But no. Looking through sources. Now, interesting enough, I have an idea where the source for some of his ships descriptions might come from. Because there is in here a Parkes, British Battleships 1860 and 1950, London 1958. Now, I've seen a section of that, and it is a very interesting work. But, more so than others, it does take a lot of interesting discussions from people, and this is a battlecruiser design, Project 1913, of the French Navy. I showed this yesterday on Twitter. Of course, the battlecruiser variant of the Leon class. It's a good book. It's worth having, but it's for sources like Parkes, etc., are not particularly how do I put this politely? Well sourced, in my experience, in sections. Well, the section I have to say I haven't read the whole of it, so it could be just the sections I have seen do not really strike me as being well sourced. And one should not critique a whole book based on half a chapter. So I'm just going to say that half the chapter I saw, which was about interwar battleships, was not exactly what section I would consider a well-sourced reference guide. But Parkes was a fairly respected historian, and I'm guessing what happened was Freya read this, read Parkes, and thought, well, Parkes is an expert. Well, Breyer did. He must know. So therefore, I will follow what he says. There's Act Monarch. They look good. Sorry, the angle, it's slightly off on the angle. Prince Eugen. Svend Istvan. Ezag Franz Ferdinand. And we have Argentina with their crane derricks, quite obviously illustrated in this one. And of course their US style masts. One of the things I'm not so keen, I have to admit, is this. In view of the conduct, and this is swallowing entirely Austrian propaganda, I think, on this one. In view of the conduct of its unreliable Italian ally, a nice way, there was no love lost between the Austrians and the Italians. At no point were they really close allies. The Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy felt compelled to start building capital ships as well. One of the most important proponents was the Admiral Count Montecuculi, who had been head of the Austrian Naval Section since 1904. Without waiting parliamentary approval, he placed orders on his own responsibility with Stabilimento Tesinio Triestio for the construction of 2 capital ships. Otherwise, the shipyard would have been compelled, through lack of orders, to dismiss its trained teams of experts who would not have been readily available later on in the event of a resumption of construction of capital ships. On the other hand, Count Montecuculi did not want to wait until the next meeting of the deputies because the date of the next session was uncertain. The subsequent success justified his initiative because the fleet constructor program submitted by him in 1911 was approved by the delegates and ensured not only the construction of these 2, but of 2 further ships as well. Although the plan specified for the Imperial Royal Navy a future strength of 16 battleships, 12 cruisers, 24 destroyers, 72 torpedo boats, 12 submarines, and 12 Danube monitors, and 12 Danube patrol vessels. I do not think it has anything to do with the reliability of the Italians, and is more to do with the fact that the Austrians didn't trust anyone. In the nicest way, that is one of the interesting things I would say again in this book and in some other books. But it is a good book to have. But it's like with all books, you do not read it with how do I put this? Read all works with an open mind, but also maintain a filter. Do not take whenever you're reading something, put it in the context of other stuff you've read. I.e., for me, in the case of reading the names here, I've got books like this where I've read the name, I've gone through the naming history of the Royal Navy, and didn't jibe. Then I go and check the archival sources in Q and other places, and those names are not the names being mentioned, or even being discussed. And it makes sense. So basically, someone has had a flight of fancy. And the thing is, their flight of fancy got printed. And I'm not sure whether it's in this book or it's in Park's books, or where it is the first source of it gets printed. But my guess, if it was anywhere, is someone's had a conversation with, well, it's got to be a Fisher-type character who likes the idea of naming ships saints. But Fisher had, and this is something I'll be getting into at some point, had lost his argument. He lost his control over defence procurement of shipbuilding because of some of the things he'd been argued, and there's a big problem with the incomparable class. And I'll be taking the incomparable to pieces in a few weeks' time in one of the videos to come up in key ships, because well, actually, so this is key ships. Key ships, 18th of August, so yes, HMS Incomparable. Going to record this on Monday, hopefully, or Tuesday this week. And yeah, there you go, that's taken from this book. That's the design stats, but that's the final slide, so yeah, that's coming in. And someone already tweeted that this was coming up, that I was going to be saying something similar, that there was a problem with the idea of the HMS Incomparable, because I have recently been pointing out the problem with having too few guns to make a salvo. And for ranging fire, the fact you need at least 3, at least 6, but also, and this is the point that came up, you need a certain rate of fire. Because there is no point firing and then having to wait a long time before firing again. Because your information is decreasing in accuracy. You need to straddle, refine and fire as quickly as you can. And that's the problem with once you start to get above 16, 18 inch guns. 18 inch is practical, but it's an issue. 16 inch it's viable, but once you get above 18 inch, the rate of fire, because of the machinery you can build at a time, starts to go down noticeably. And that has an effect on your accuracy, especially at long range. And your big advantage with those shells is your long range. So if you're engaging at short range, yeah, it doesn't matter, they'll hit, because you've got far easier computing. But if you're firing and engaging in a long range, and when I'm talking long range, I'm talking 18 to 28,000 yards, that sort of region of where most battles take place. 18,000 yards is roughly what the Royal Navy considers a decisive battle range. 28,000 to 30,000 are where the Americans and the Japanese and occasionally the British like to start hanging out, in terms of, we'll start the engagement but we're going to get closer. I know some American doctrines and some Japanese doctrines call for trying to fight the entire battle at 28,000 yards. It's a lovely idea, but that range combined with your rate of fire means that you're eventually actually hitting your opponents quite low. But if you do, it's probably going to be a hit to their deck armor. But so this is why, you know, if you've got a 20-inch gun, that sounds great, but that rate of fire is probably going to be horrendously slow in comparison, which is going to affect your accuracy, because it's going to affect how often you are able to check your computing information. Incomparable was so if we do that, comparable was, as you can see hopefully on this, 6 by 20-inch guns. So 3 twin 20-inch guns. So basically she's a supersized Renown. Ooh, questions. There's lots of questions coming. Oh. Lagman Maxus, what is the difference between building a ship in a slipway versus a dry dock? It's going to be your method way to launch, and honestly, if you're building in a dry dock, you can probably build it bigger and heavier. Because you're not going to put it through the same strains on launch, you're going to flood the water around it, rather than having it crashing into the water and possibly hitting things. So it's a far more gentle launch. Right, if the Iron takes a crash build, a breath after build, a crash build runs into treaties in roughly the same state as normal, i.e. +3 Admiral battlecruiser, what does Nelrod look like? Probably like Nelrod's. But they might well be bigger, slightly faster, because I have a feeling if you've got 4 40,000-ton ships in service, then there's no ignoring the Admiral class. So the probability is that the standard ton limit is made 40,000 tons rather than 35,000 tons. So you're probably talking Nelson and Rodney are built to. Well, if considering they went for 1,500 tons under 35,000 tons to guarantee they were under 35,000 tons, they probably go for 38,500 tons. But imagine what Nelson and Rodney would be like with an extra 7,000 tons. You're probably talking 28 knot ships. They might even actually go nicest way. They might grow up to having. There might be 28 knots and 12 16-inch guns in 4 triple turrets for an extra 7,000 tons. Because the amount of effort amount of stuff you can do with an extra 7,000 tons is quite impressive. I understand the talk about Washington. I feel a lot of the problem is even if numbers are the same, you can't do what you want at 35,000 tons, but 40,000 tons is close enough to fair. Yeah, 40,000 tons standard is close enough to do what you want to do. Right, if the IGN gets their 7-10 ratio, do they slow what the construction to take the pressure of the economy? They have to, because they have a limitation on the infrastructure. The IGN cannot charge through the construction. Nice from the AO New Zealand HOI AO New Zealand class heavy cruisers are shortened but heavier versions of the Surrey variant of the Candy class with thinner armour, but faster and more. That sounds completely in nicest way. If you make a vessel faster, that's okay. So you're telling me they've shortened, but made it heavier than a Surrey class version of the County. But faster and more heavily but faster. In nicest way, if something's shorter and heavier, it's not going to be faster. It's going to have more issue and more heavily armed. That's not going to work in real life. It's just not. Because you are reducing your amount of space, you're reducing your length to beam ratio, which is going to make your higher speed less efficient. So you're going to reduce your cruising speed. You might have a higher top speed, but you're going to have a lower cruising speed. And for a cruiser, cruising speed is more important than higher top speed in some ways. So yeah, that just sounds like a recipe for someone has had a bright idea. To me, it just does. Someone has had a bright idea. Did the Royal Navy have icebreakers during World War II? That's an interesting question. My instinct is to say the Royal Navy didn't have icebreakers themselves, but they did have access to people who ran icebreakers, because I think they got a couple of Norwegian ones which escaped from Norway. What the equivalent of icebreakers in that time, and the Canadians had some, and the Russians had some. I'm not sure if the Royal Navy themselves operated any of those. They might have been Royal Navy coordinated but not operated. But I'm not 100% sure, because honestly I haven't looked into that for some reason. That's weird. I'm gonna have to look into that now. Can you put a link to the book in the notes, please, Dr. Clarke? Yeah, I can put a link to. I'll get an Amazon link up. Ryan, you should find all the details of the book if you follow the link below. That's working. That's working, and that's working. Remember, 600 a month is a solid side hustle, so let's not break it down into hourly. Let's put it this way. That would not be good. Because I think, considering other things like this week, that works out about £5 an hour this week, in the last week alone, if I'm working at, if I'm doing it on that sort of analysis. But I like YouTube. But it is sort of, I would say in time, YouTube, in terms of for every hour of video I produce, there is about, I would say, 2 hours of work that goes into it. So, and I wouldn't include things like the Twitch streams, etc. in that. I'm just talking about the pure YouTube stuff. So, yeah. Just thinking, going through the list of this week. Preps for this one, preps for the other ones, videos. Let's see, this week in terms of videos, what did I come up? I've had let's see, we had the Seigfried Breyer, which was an hour long. Actually, that was about 3 to 4 hours of prep time. So yeah, that was about 4 hours work. Navigation Axe, 90 minutes plus about a 3-hour live, and I wouldn't be a 3 to 4 hour live. So let's say 3-hour live because that's about 4.5 hours. I would say I spent about 12 hours putting that together. Plus there's the time recording, etc. So yeah, so that's. Yeah, and then what Can Is Right for the Ship was about 3 hours work, prepping it together and pulling together. So yeah, and then about an hour recording. Yeah, so that's about 4 hours. That's probably about 16 for the Navigation Axe this week. Navigation Axe, but that's only that. I'm not sure what Navigation Axe came out this week on the 2nd of August. Seigfried Breyer, that's about another 4 hours. So that's 8 hours, and then What Governments the Washington Treaty? Ooh, yeah, that was a good few hours as well. That was about 4.5 hours in recording, about 8 hours. Yeah, we're actually. I was working out probably about less than that. It's possibly closer. This is again. There is a slight strange thing with me because remember I don't sleep much. I am a functioning insomniac, as I often point out to it. In which case I really don't sleep that much. So probably over this week I have spent, on terms of stuff for history stuff for YouTube, probably somewhere region of 50 hours of my time. Which probably works out about £3 an hour. I haven't had any sponsorship offers. I haven't had any of those things come through Farmers reached 16 weren't shells creeping up in weight for the same caliber as successful models? Yes, but they were usually creeping up at the rate that the actual systems could keep up with maintaining the rate of fire. So whilst the individual shells were getting heavier in each series of guns, the fact was the machinery was keeping pace with that. But when you jump up a caliber, and if you consider how heavy a 20-inch gun's shells are going to be, it suddenly becomes you are reaching the limits of that machinery's tolerances, capabilities. During the 1920s, could the Japanese have afforded, on top of their new building as historical, to build more dockyards like those that would build the Yamato and Musashi, say 6 or 8 yards? Oh. Probably not 6 or 8 yards. They could probably have afforded to build... They had 3 yards which could build the Yamato. They had about 6 yards which could build the number 13s. They could have possibly upgraded all 6 of those yards to Yamato standards, but the big trouble for the Japanese are the earthquakes and the amount of spare land they have. Honestly, you would need to do a lot of investment in infrastructure to make those yards build those yards, and build them so that they are earthquake proof, earthquake and natural disaster proof. So that's going to be very expensive. And you could do it, but it's going to be very expensive and would require you not doing some of the things with the army which you did historically, because you need that money to come from somewhere. Either that or you break your economy, in which case you go bankrupt in about 1930. My heart wants to say 1936, but my brain is saying 1932. Could a 1,000-pound semi-armor piercing bomb in grass-based Ford diesel engine room really be enough to knock out the propulsion system? It probably wouldn't knock out the entire propulsion system, I doubt, as it's the Ford diesel engineering room. But if a 1,000-pound semi-armor piercing bomb really did penetrate and got into that engine room, it would certainly knock a lot off the speed and maneuverability of Grass Bay and would make it virtually a sitting duck to British cruisers and other British. And if there's one aircraft hit in a nice way, if they're going slow enough, then they've been damaged enough, then the aircraft can go back, rearm, and they can come back again. How would you refit? How would you refit HMS Lord Nelson for the early Cold War late 1940s tech? Oh, good lord, Lord Nelson's. Fudge me. Well, for starters, I've got to replace the engines. You've got to replace all the guns. I've got 12-inch guns. I must replace the 4.5. I must replace the 4.5 12-inch guns. Side guns, I'm going to replace with 4.5-inch guns. Twin turrets. UD mounts, preferably. I could probably get 4 of those on each side. That's also going to give me more space and crew for other things. And if I replace the engines, need less crew for those, so I can get better crew habitation. And then I would turn them into mobile patrol ships, basically, for long-range presence missions. So, taking the grandsons for Ducks for Air Museum. Any suggestions for aircraft to look at? All of them. But I would say this. Duxford has a lot of little back spaces, which if you just follow the main rung, you don't see. So when you get to the hangars, if you notice there's paths going through the hangars to the other side of them, go to the other side of them, go through the backs. Go have a look at it and make sure you go through all of it, because there's control centers, there's all sorts of things hidden out the back that that little kids really do love to see, and quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very few people don't always get, quite a lot of people don't find them. 'Cause very Was the Candy class really based on your class? No, they're improved London class. No, sorry, no. Well, the Kriegsmarine looking into diesel electric for their service rails. Think it might get them better range, top speed, and survivability if they had engines to support it. They did look into it, but they also they didn't think they could get it up to giving them a high enough speed. It could give them the range, but not the high enough speed. So actually, they're probably looking at for a combination of steam and diesel. But there was a lot of arguing about it. Look, I'm not saying I want you to do some sponsorships, but you have to pay the bills. I've heard you play World of Warships Blitz. I do. In fact, I've got my. Next week, I am with one of my colleagues from Justin Craig, and we regularly end up on our phones playing World of Warships Blitz in our break times. when the students and all the staff are in lessons teaching. And the centre team are sitting there just going, right, we've done all our jobs, we've done all our photocopying, we're just going to sit here for 5 minutes and have a break. He and I will either end up playing World of Warships Blitz or we'll end up playing basketball. No, so the problem with building that many big yards is that it gets much harder to hide the fact you're building a super battleship. You can build some pretty big merchant ships to your reason for it. I've got 2 copies of this book. It's a good book. Right, I'm just going to turn off the big light again. We are going off, big light. Oh. Really weird earlier, I had a mosquito hovering in my ear, I swear. I will say there's one thing, which is always the same when it comes to KFC. You do get the KFC caught in your teeth. Okay, moving on. Don't know why I enjoy the questions. My turn. With the whale has wings and heart of iron, I'm presuming. I'll do this again. Whenever I read about the MB Cormorant, all the information I have read gives me British SPD vibes, and the whale has wings book says it's broadly comparable to SPD Dauntless and Helldiver. I haven't read any of that, so I have no frame of reference really, but I will trust you. But you haven't given me a question. I really should. The amount of Hearts of Iron I have read is literally for you, 96831. With your questions, I have occasionally gone and found their version of Wikipedia and gone through that. At a certain point, I feel like I probably will need to go further. Follow up. Is the limiting factor the flywheel output of the marine diesel at the time, or the additional weight of multi-thousand kilowatt generators and motors? It's the flywheel to an extent. It's basically reaching a level at which the metallurgy. People often forget at just how much development of diesels happens in the 50s and 60s. They are very good, but they reach a sort of plateauing point in about 1933. 34-ish, and they sort of plateau there for a few years, with there being little works around the edges, and then in 1914-8-ish they suddenly jump up, especially in terms of the broadly available. People can usually provide a point to go, oh look, there's this advantage, and this diesel, this specific diesel, and you go, well, how many of those diesels are produced? And they're very few number, and they're very expensive, and case in point. You are right, Renan. It's your understanding that the reason the US standards were in the speed bracket they were was due to consistency in the battle line and saving on weight displacement. Pretty much. Yeah. Or is it? A little outside the norm, but do you see a place for seaplanes today? What do they look like? The Japanese, I think, still operate some. They can be very useful. Resupplying islands, operating from islands in the Middle Ocean. They can also be used for doing some specific versions of anti-submarine warfare, which they'd be quite capable of. And it's vessels which can operate from a broader range of spaces in terms of aircraft. It's very difficult to go through all the potential operating bases for a seaplane and stop them being able to be used. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. Bambo Maximus, without a second Sino-Japanese war and subsequent sanctions, what could the Japanese military have done with the money and better economics if they still attacked everyone in 1941 as historical? The trouble is, if they haven't got a Sino-Japanese war, and they haven't got the sanctions, then they are going to be in a better position, but they aren't also going to be in a position to do what they did, because in a nice way, the Sino-Japanese war is why they're in a position to go and do the French into China. So, for example, their invasion of Singapore and the Philippines takes much longer because they haven't got that much further down with their bases and their infrastructure. So, whilst you could go, well, you know, they could have invaded there anyway because the Vichy France thing, they could have done, but to actually get there is far more difficult than if they're launching from China. The distance is involved. So if they don't have the bases they get in the Second Sino-Japanese War, and they're not doing that, then whilst they are in a better position economically, they're in a not as good a position geographically. They can still do the Pearl Harbor, but they've got a lot more fighting to go through to get through places. And they probably would go straight to the Philippines instead of the French into China, and probably concentrate on that and main thrust. And then once they got through the Philippines, then go for Singapore and Malaya, which is going to cause a difference in terms of timeline. They might even divert and try and go further south than the Philippines. Maybe Malaysia, well, definitely Malaysia and Dutch East Indies. They might even try and go further south and fight the emus, but that's not a good route for anyone, because fighting emus is not good, and also it would mean that they were at the complete end of their logistics trail, and be right in the teeth of Allied submarine strength. And especially if they haven't got Singapore at that point, because if there's a British fleet capable of operating from Singapore, the Indian Ocean is blocked off to a large extent, so the British supplies to Australia can come unfettered from India, etc., and the Far East. But also, you've got, if you consider a submarine fleet operating from Singapore against the supply line trying to run from Japan to Australia, then you've got basically a submarine hunting ground right in the middle of it, and an easy submarine hunting ground for them to get to. So it's not really a good position for them. Hi, Steamline. Richard, for Christmas, would you consider going to HQS Wellington and doing a tour for your channel? I've already booked in what I'm doing for Christmas, so the trouble with planning to do roughly 180 videos over the Christmas period, over what I'm calling my Christmas period, it's going to be 150 to 180, is that you have to start planning quite a long time in advance. And so I've got the Australia ones, they're going to be a factor into it. They're going to be part of the Monday series. I guess the Monday series is going to be. I'm hoping to get, the Monday series, which includes Christmas Day. I'm hoping to get some Monday videos from I'm hoping to get, and that's free. Yeah, no, it's got one more either side of that. I'm hoping to get some Monday videos from people who are fans of the channel who want to contribute their own videos for it. So basically my idea is I do 4 of the Monday videos, they do 4 of the Monday videos. So I would need 3 more, because I've got, someone's already sent me a video, and I'm going to be advertising that in a bit and sorting that out in a bit. On Discord and Twitter I'll be advertising that, and on the channel of course, and the community page. Then the Wednesday videos are going to be key ship series, the Friday videos are going to be key ship series, the Saturday videos are going to continue to be long controls for the Thursdays. The Sunday videos are going to be Bruships, barring the 24th of December. Well, hang on, no, the 24th of December is going to be. But yeah. So the Sundays will continue to be Bruships. Saturdays will be long patrols for the Thursday videos. And then every morning there's going to be a common response video to a key ship series video going up. And there's also going to be a whole load of shorts, including roughly 30 Hot Tub Historian, hopefully, videos. Professor, I understand that the value of salvo fire, but given some gun crews can load faster and odds are not of all your guns are going to fire, is it practical or pointless and shouldn't you fire at all? Depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about salvo fire once you're talking in the Dreadnought era, then it's very, the point is accuracy, and the gun crews are getting much of a muchness. If you're talking Age of Sail, there again they're going to be drilled to the point at which they will be firing, will be reloading and firing at roughly the same amount, or same rate. But the thing is, after you've fired the first salvo, first couple of salvos, it's usually fire at will. In which case you're going to have those guns working as hot and as fast as they can, and as fast as the crews can make them. Because it's going to sound strange, but you can only control salvo firing for that long in the heat of battle, because people can't hear you. And even then, if you consider, this is one of the factors which are often misunderstood and not realised by Age of Sail. Someone like Captain Smith, Captain Hardy. Sorry, I was calling by his great grandson's name. Captain Hardy at Trafalgar commands HMS Victory at all times with only hand signals. Doesn't speak at all in the battle. Everything is by hand signals in terms of commands, because people can't hear him. There is no point in him shouting, because the noise is so loud, the din of effort is so great, no one can hear him. So he does it all by hand signals, which are repeated. So, at a certain point, you can't control a salvo. So you fire the first salvo, you have them ready to go, and then it's fire at will. Sometimes you hold it for a couple of salvos. But it's going to be the first engagement is going to be a salvo, and then it's going to be fire at will. Were there any previous attempts previous to elections by the US Navy to get a Congress to pay for battlecruisers? Not really. They had sort of looked into it, but not really. And let's be honest, the Lexingtons really are battlecruiser two-lords designed to go hunting down cruisers, be escorts, and commerce raiding and commerce protection. They are not designed to go and fight other battlecruisers. So realistically, what would happen to the Royal Australian Navy, get the counties starting in 28 to 30, then New York and New 30, then next... They have more counties. If they have more counties, they will have more counties in certain engagements, because they'll have more ships available. If you have more ships available, that's going to have a consequence. What consequence it's going to have, I have no idea. For example, if you have another county, or even another county, Surrey, at the Battle of the River Plate, well, the odds are they do a tag team of the 2 heavy cruisers go one way, the 2 light cruisers go the other way, and so you have an extra 8-inch guns engaging the Grass Bay. That's going to cause a lot more damage a lot more quickly. That might mean she gets sunk at sea. It might mean when she reaches Montevideo Harbour, she sinks in the harbour. I have no idea, because it's at that point, it's beyond the point of computation. It's too many what ifs, and too many if this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. You have to be, as I always try to be very, very careful when I'm doing the alternate histories, etc. you have to be very careful and drill in exactly what you're changing, and then you have to work through quite in depth to try and figure out what might happen and what the likely deployment schedule is going to be. They have extra ships. They're going to be very happy with them. But that means extra counties are going to turn up in certain places. There could be an extra counties at the Battle of Java Sea. What effect's that going to have? Well, we know how good Exeter was when she had a previous gun crew and a previous crew in the Battle of River Plate. We also know that she was working up her crew at Java Sea, and this made her incredibly less capable of her long-range fire. So if you'd had another cruiser which was just as worked up as if she had been at River Plate at Java Sea, then suddenly you could have a crack 8-inch Royal Navy 8-inch cruiser involved. And that could lead to a lot of... that might not change the fate, of course, of the battle in terms of success, and might actually be another loss for the Allies. But it also might cause the Japanese to lose more ships, and then what consequences does that have with them having less cruisers? How impact does it have on subsequent operations that those cruisers would have been in? Which is the most likely to have been lost? Blackman Maximus, could the Japanese have successfully invaded the Philippines instead of Korea in 1592? Or would the Spanish have been able to successfully fend them off? Would the Spanish have been able to... I'm not sure the Spanish would have been successfully able to... hang on. The Spanish have some pretty big warships wandering around in 1592. Would they have been successfully able to fend them off? Is going to depend on... They probably lose in terms of the first invasion. But they then probably turn up in strength afterwards, and they might well win. Because if they turn up with a big enough fleet and enough firearms, then they probably win. Even against the Japanese massive ability of archery, etc. If you're turning up with enough firearms, enough capabilities, they probably win. Because those are weapons which Japan doesn't have in the same quantity or capabilities at that time. And especially when you're talking about ship fire support. So basically the ships the Japanese would turn up would probably tip the battle in their favour. Let's mention, how much difference would the Pacific War be if the Japanese had radar the same or better than the USN? Imagine all the night fights where both sides can see each other just as easily as they can, as the Americans can see the Japanese. And add in the Japanese ability of long-range torpedoes, which the Americans don't believe in, officially. Unofficially, quite a lot of their crews seem to believe in them. It would be a lot bloodier from the American perspective, and you probably have a longer war because of that. Seemingly, if you could reincarnate a class of Royal Navy vessel sailing in 1945 to use in the Royal Navy in 2023, what would you pick? I could reincarnate an entire class from 1945. Ooh. Sailing in 1945. Ooh. You see, it's tempting to go for an aircraft carrier class, because then we could really use them, but no. Let's go for something else. What would I pick? Frigates are all too small and would require a lot of work to upgrade to make them useful. Same with the cruisers and the destroyers, really. So you'll need to go for something which is suitably useful. Aircraft carriers, again, you need to do a lot of work on their flight decks to make them F-35 viable. And if you consider the size of the carriers we had in 1945 versus the ones we have today, there's a big issue going on there. So what would I do? I'd say I'm tempted by some of the submarines. But again, we need to do a lot of work on them, but there's some good interesting diesel boats. The V's especially would interest me, and well, the A's are a bit late in that, so the V's probably. The A's successor to the U's. I would say it's between the V's And if I could have them in a working, perfect condition, Nelson or... Well, actually, would it be Nelson or Rodney? Would it be faster? I'd want to go something faster. I'd love HMS Renown, but no. If I could have a... If they would come, not as they were conditioned in 1945, but as if they were being built brand new to that standard, I go for HMS Renown. But if not, then I'm going to go for HMS Vanguard in 1945. Because that gives me a ship which has a capability which provides me support for amphibious operations with its firepower, provides me with a status ship for going around the world, it's got enough space and distribution weight that I can easily upgrade it to modern standards and modern missiles and radars, and I can make use of those guns. And I could also provide, I could also with those guns sit there could work out an automation system for them. Take care, Tanith. Thank you. And thank you for the super chat, Steam Lang. Actually, how much faster are the RN on the firing cannons? The Royal Navy on average could do 3, occasionally 4 rounds every 5 minutes. So it depends on, especially if you're talking about the first salvos, they can, including the first salvo, you can get up to 4 rounds in 5 minutes. The French were usually closer to 2 in the same period. So, let's put it this way, the Royal Navy could guarantee to fire 3 rounds in 5 minutes. And would be trained and drilled to do that. The French would fire 3 rounds in 6 minutes. And that's if they had a good crew. Because of the amount of time they have in port, especially, they do far less firing of actual guns, let alone even the drilling with the guns, than the Royal Navy do. They don't, and the French don't run the guns as much as the Royal Navy do, and definitely don't fire their guns as much as the Royal Navy do, because they're in port, and it's very difficult to do those things in port. Because people don't like it when guns start poking out of their ships near their houses. It makes them very upset and worried. It causes issues, especially if you're dealing with a country like France, where, well, you know, there's been a little bit of political issues recently. And when your fleet's based in a foreign country, i.e. in Spain, for some reason Spanish admirals and Spanish generals get very uncomfortable with a lot of ships running their guns out of their ports and pointing them at their fortifications. Even if it is just running your guns, it gets very, very uncomfortable. Okay. Rapper Isaac, Clarke, which ship was less fully fought through than Capitan Alvasa? In other words, you're saying which ships have run away with an idea to such an extent that they have lost sight of the fact that they're going to be a ship operating in the world in the most hazardous space on Earth, aka the sea. Okay. There is a certain class of vessel, which are often referred to as boats, which operate on the Great Lakes. Now, these bulk carriers are how do I put this politely? They have an interesting history. They have a very interesting history. And they have lost some modern vessels in sort of the last 70 years. One of the most classic examples is the loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And they basically have an engine room at the stern, I would almost call it a control platform at the bow, which has the sort of bridge and superstructure. And then in between they have a massive open space which doesn't have bulkheads or much across it at all, and just is this open framing which can carry a huge amount of bulk, but it also means the ship twists in the water as it's going along. And yeah, there are a lot of those in service, and if I were worried about anything, it'd be those. And I'm probably running risk of getting into trouble saying that. I know they've done a lot of safety work to try and make the modern ones safer, and I know they've done a lot of work to... They do a lot more work in terms of weather prediction and protection that way, and routing, but the thing is, as a design, that worries me. That worries me. And I have no doubt the crews do their best, and I would hope the companies do, and that everything is much better than it was in the 1970s. But there are still these vessels operating, these bulk freighters. They are 1,000 foot long, some of them, by 105 feet wide. Some of them are as much as almost 89, nearly 90,000 tons. Yeah, I think American Integrity is probably the largest, and she's just colossal. But they do worry me. Let's go on. If Japan didn't take the Chinese coast, would the Royal Navy have been able to operate submarines out of Hong Kong as well as surface units out of Singapore? Potentially. It depends how quickly they try and do an amphibious assault around or to take Singapore. Potentially, though. Also depends if the Chinese decide to go very pro-British and use their force around it. Because if China's not invaded, they're going to be a far better state when it comes time to fight the Japanese than if they've got the second Sino-Japanese war going on. Nice to know everyone. How practically do you see the French Clemenceau areas being reconstructed with a 34-foot increase in length and 2 additional prop shafts? Okay, it's probably easier to build a brand new carrier than do all that. 96831, but I would say if you're going to that's useful, but it's very expensive, very difficult. And taking a carrier apart and putting in a 34-foot increase of length is going to be expensive. Alright, what's the upper limit on the size and weight for a shell where it can carry enough powder to fire it, or you can build a breech capable to handle the pressure? There's no theoretical upper limit other than that which is achieved by the metallurgy of the substances involved. But practical limit is the weight of the shell and being able to move it around your system and rate of fire. Azaski, was taking cover when a SAL was incoming a real thing in Age of Sail or just a movie and video game fiction? Why would you take cover? What is there to take cover behind? You're going to hide behind the wooden decks? Well, you're mostly down inside the decks anyway, but mostly you clear the decks when the enemy starts blasting in decks, and once you lose control of the deck of your ship, well, then you very quickly lose control. You can very quickly be boarded and lose control of your ship. Yeah, Age of Sail, taking cover. Again, also, it's... the whole thing is, you're doing your job. If you're taking cover, you're not firing your own guns back. And that's great, because that means the enemy's getting to fire at you without any consequences. They'll love that. Oh, Admiral William Fisher, if he hadn't died in 1937, is probably heading to the First Sea Lord at some point. Probably gets there instead of Pound. He's more senior up the ranks. Okay, Stephen Richards, you're going to have to give me a reference here for the Duke of Kent class? You're talking about probably the 1809 plan of Joseph Tucker. It's an interesting thing. It's a 170 gun ship of the line and 3,000 tons berthing. It's not impossible for the Royal Navy to have made it. It's also not impossible that Joseph Tucker designed it. It's also, there's a chance, of course, as put forward by some in the 1930s, that Joseph Tucker didn't design it, that friends did, and to bolster his reputation. But making a model of such a ship and doing drawings, that's going to a lot of effort to bolster a man's reputation when it's already fairly good. I would also add, and this is a small point, but the fact is, whilst certain innovations are attributed to others, that doesn't mean that they might originally be the ones who designed, or even the ones who came up with them. Well, they may not be the ones who originally come. It doesn't matter that the idea hasn't been being discussed for a while. It's just whether or not they've actually built it. Often we attribute the ideas to the first person who actually builds it, not to the first person who has a discussion in a pub about it. And or even the first person who actually maybe puts it down on pen and paper, because again, not all the drawings, in fact a lot of the experimental drawings do not survive. So yeah. Again, 961, if you're going to put that much effort into Clemenceau, that you're even replacing their boilers and steam turbines with gas turbines, integrated power systems, also, it's easy to build a new ship. Really, it is. You're talking about A, cutting a ship open and adding new bits in point, which are going to add stress points, which you need to account for in the hull design. B, you are, and changing her balance and water performance and getting it all, the shaping right, is going to be a fun one. You're also ripping out her boilers, ripping out all her systems, adding in an integrated power system, which is turning everything electric, gas turbines, magnetic motors with increased power, speed and range, and all those things. Once you're doing all that, you are building a new ship. There is absolutely no point in keeping anything of the rest. It is going to be quicker, cheaper, easier, and produce a better result to build a new ship. This is the scary thing. At that, once you are basically, you are doing the equivalent of a great refit in Admiralty terms. In which case, you build a new ship and the nameplate survives, and you go, yes, government, this is honestly, this is the Clemenceau and the Foch. Not, these are brand new ships. You're doing a great refit, okay? Yes, we took the entire thing apart completely and then reassembled it bit by bit with entirely new components. Does the RN ever have a service-wide mismatch between their weapons capability doctrine, e.g. accurate weapons with prioritizing rate of fire over accuracy? There is a bit of a one in the run-up to Jutland, especially in certain squadrons. Mainly the battlecruiser force, but also in some of the cruiser squadrons. Ronan, in the Sino-Japanese War, the 1920s 30s edition doesn't happen or stops shortly after the establishment of Manchukuo and the nationalist government obtains control. Do they join the Allies in World War II ASAP? That'd be an interesting one. If Japan decided to, in 1939, if they weren't on the outs and if Britain and everyone's Britain's fighting Germany and Italy, Japan decides to join Britain and France in fighting Germany and Italy. That could be a really interesting scenario for the Americans to deal with. I think the first great refit is actually Britain, because, and there's a reason for this, it's not national conceit or anything like that. The Dutch get mighty close, but the Dutch Admiralty have a habit of preferring to sell off ships to become merchant vessels and then building a new ship. And then giving it the old name. But everyone knows they do it. Whereas the British Admiralty are interesting when it comes to their ships. And there are sometimes people tell me, well, this ship in the Age of Sail has a 60-year career. And I go, and how many great refits does it have in that time? Well, it has 3. Yep, it has 3 great refits in that time. But it has a 60-year career. I haven't checked Patreon yet. I have no idea who won the Patreon vote. It would be sensible to actually check that one, wouldn't it? I'll do that, and we'll be finishing at 11 o'clock this evening because, well, I have a weird week ahead. I do have a weird week ahead. I'm sorry I'm being a bit funny today, but it's been an interesting weekend, interesting week. Having, hopefully this week, my mum and sister do not have the same issues they've had for the last couple of weeks. actually, in the way I timed it, it has actually got 15 minutes more to run. You should have received a notification about that. So, you should have received a notification saying you've got 15 more minutes to vote. And let's see, can I do add source? Add source, there's patron vote. Hello. Right then, patron vote. Ooh, I can do that. Hello. Hello, right then, so I'm not voting. We have got currently percentages, because it's not giving me the readouts. On 13% we have David Forfeit. What were the most serious mistakes made in World War II based on World War I experience? And on 10% we have Maxwell's Wooden Walls at Sea. Process of how wooden ships were built, between 1700s and 1860 are built. And then 10% of it we have 50 gun ship of the line. And then Steve Clarke, and I have to admit, signatories of Washington Treaty during interwar years. What was their biggest mistake and missed opportunity? Ooh, awesome. It was pretty good options going on. Let me see if I can get... Give me a second. Let's... open that. Totals. And if we're going for actual numbers, because it's only allowing individual votes, which is always fun when it does that, and it's decided to do that, we've got one with 5 votes and 3 currently with 4 votes. So yes, even 1 vote could change things. And there's only 1 vote difference between currently 4th votes and this, the Wooden Walls at Sea. So you have about 12 more minutes to vote. If you haven't voted, please go vote. And 40 votes have been total loss because it wouldn't for some reason let me do multiple choice votes this week. I have no idea. Ever thought about going to visiting HMS Caroline during a tour for your channel? I would like to, but I haven't got to Ireland with a camera in a long time. Outside of motor torpedo boats, motor gunboats, or patrol boats, what do you think packs the most firepower per ton in the major powers in World War II? So tempted to say steamboats, but we'll leave that to one. So that's me. That'll be me just going for a wind up. Packs the punch. It's got to be the destroyers, but it's going to debate how you're going to phrase that destroyers. But honestly, usually the ones which are carrying the most guns in terms of destroyers are probably the American ones. A great refit is more an iron thing. Renowned, Wall Spider, Extras Victory about 3 times. Yep, nameplate's the same. Stanflex didn't want it, never does. Stanflex is currently on. You know, you try a Stanflex. You got 2% of the vote, Jack Ray. So do not be upset. You got 2% of the vote, which means you got 1 vote. Currently, Steve Clarke's Signatories of Washington Naval Treaty has gone up by 1 vote, I'm presuming, because it's now level pegging with David Formwaite. So I'm presuming they both got 5 votes, and there's been 41 votes cast. They've gone Howard Drop, Hope Moment, Sister okay. They're hopefully. Well, not at the moment. They're not rearranging the garden again, thankfully, this evening, and I'm hoping my mum and sister are going to be okay this week. Not submarines. No, submarines are interesting in terms of their tonnage to punch. You have to remember, they are not putting in terms of volume of firepower. A lot of their money is going into being able to do the sort of sneaky stuff and go under the water. So they're pound for pound not the most heavily armed, because they have a lot of poundage devolved to what they have to do in order to be a submarine. No, sir. Is it accurate to say Essex class were the victims of what HMS Victorious, the ever-increasing size of jet aircraft? It's also age and the volume of use of that took place to them. Those 2 things do tend to catch up with you. Nice. How did the British make the Phantom Buccaneer work on the Audacious when they had the same problem, the ship fuel capacity and bomb magazine that killed off the idea of the F4 and A6 on the Essex? A lot of supply ships. Well, let's be honest. It's rather nice. It was designed for the Maltas, so by the time you reach the Maltas, what are they looking at? They're looking at something different. They're looking for 2-person crew, torpedo bomber, dive bomber, yeah. They're big, powerful, fairly decent strike aircraft. Use the British little Centauras, which is fairly reliable. Yeah, they're your strike aircraft. How the doctrine they're supposed to be useful? Probably night strike and day strike. And if you consider they've got guns in a Fraser-Nash remote-controlled barbette on a dorsal, yeah, that's going to be fun. Able to carry rockets or 2,000 pounds of bombs or depth charges, yeah. capable, interesting aircraft. I think we need to have a few more meetings before we officially announce NavHist Scandinavia. And that's Scan 24, isn't it? Yeah, NavHist Scan 24. That sounds like we're going to scan documents in archives. Yeah, you've got Type 7 U-boat was 800 tons with 14 torpedoes, but a destroyer is about 2,000 tons. Well, 1,500 tons, and it's also got all the guns. It's all got all the cannon. It's it's got the torpedoes as well. And it's got depth charges. It's a pound for pound weapons total. Yeah, the submarine doesn't pound for pound win that fight. The submarine's very good. But it's not even, especially, I would include modern submarines in this. You look at the sheer amount of missiles and weapons carried by a modern warship, and you look at the stuff carried by most submarines versus their size and cost. And warships tend to, and surface ships tend to win that competition. The destroyer could be carrying 10 torpedoes, it could be carrying more torpedoes. Tribal would be carrying roughly, well, there's the official number it carried and there's the actual number it carried. So this is the thing. There are destroyers going around which have 14 torpedoes, but it's more than just torpedoes. It's also guns. It's pound for pound. The question was pound for pound the amount of weapons carried. Yeah. Plus, sometimes the torpedoes on destroyers were actually heavier than the torpedoes on submarines. But in some submarines that flips around. So yeah, it's a fun thing. Let's be fun. Fair. Scanning documents and presenting them in an entertaining manner is a lot of what shipshape crew do in your day jobs. Yes, it is. Let's see, Mission. When are you heading up north? Late October, early November time, probably. Is when I will have the funding together, because I have to pay off bills, but also earn money to do other things. So yeah, I've got to find roughly £2,000 to pay for that trip, which is not impossible. Please note, if the paychecks come through as they're supposed to, and all the things add up as they're supposed to, it works. Dan, I'm not so sure. I think he does more scanning of documents and presenting them in an entertaining manner than historians do sometimes. Is it true that Caroline is the last survivor of Jutland? As far as I know, yes. Potentially, but I'm not sure. The Betty's a large, medium, twin-engine bomber aircraft that goes for quite long range. The Jupiter is a single-engined aircraft developed from the Ryushi carrier-borne aircraft of the IJN. So, no, it was only ever a proposal. So, we're not sure, honestly. And I did have to look that up to check which exact one you were asking about. I saw everyone. Oh, sorry. Comments just flashed up on my screen from other videos. And one of them making me laugh. Someone's going pew 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 from Warren G. Harding's Laser Eyes. That's right. Let's play dumb politician. Effectiveness per pound, both weight and money. What ship boat is best? Pound for pound, most effective ship you can get by. What do you want it to do? That's the question. Would a 16 destroyer class, 24 battle class, 20 weapon class, 8 1944 G class destroyers and 32 C class destroyers intended to be post-war Iron destroyer fleet? I'm not so sure about a C class, but certainly they would have factored into a post-war destroyer fleet, despite them being wartime escort emergency destroyers. G class, well, it does give you 90 destroyers, so 90 modern destroyers. So I would say, I'm not sure if they're supposed to be, they are the wartime destroyer fleet, but they're certainly going to be the core of the post-war destroyer fleet. Or if the war would continue on, they would be core of the fleet fighting in the Far East. Anuk, has the uni paid up yet? Supposedly the end of this month. We shall watch with a bated breath. But the trouble is, there is a problem, because in nicest way, to pay for a support car and all these other things and things I've had to do, I've had to, my family have contributed, which is very kind of them. They have helped me out, but then I've got to pay them back. So it's a case of I'm now going to be paying them back. So I'm not going to suddenly have money, whereas if I'd had the money when I was supposed to, I would be paying my bills and able to keep on top of things. I wouldn't be worrying about dividing my income by 4 to pay off credit card and pay off my mum and repay the money I owe to my mum and sister. Because this is how I try and do things. Whenever I owe money, I quickly try and pay it back as quick as possible. I'd be dividing my money in half and paying off the credit card and paying and living and using the other money towards the cost of life. So this is the trouble. Once you yes, the money comes back, but it always comes back slowly, and then you also need to repay. And yeah, it works out as the same money in, but it means it's a lot. It causes a lot of problems going around on that end. Why do they get to wait till the end of the month? Because they insist on waiting to payday. Make sure. I want it to be efficient. That way we can ease the burn taxpayer. What do you want it to do, Doctor? Okay, if you need the best all-around ship, if you're talking about in the 1920s, the ship you'd be building would be a vessel which could do the cruising role, but could also deal with battleships, etc. So you probably want something which is a kind of fast battleship, battlecruiser, which also has quite a heavy secondary armament, so it can wipe out the enemy destroyer formations. But you're going to need a lot of them, so you won't have to cover all your areas, which means you either build a smaller ship which can cover all your areas, but won't be able to deal with the larger ships, in which case you're in trouble. Or you make a larger ship, but then you can't cover all the places you need to be. You can either make a ship which can combat all your opponents, or you can make a ship which can be in all the places and do all the roles you need to be. And that's the problem, because if you're talking about wartime, you're going to go for the ship that can fight all your opponents. If you're talking about peacetime, You need a ship. You need a ship to be in all places you need to be for your peacetime, your conflict, your basically your conflict management shaping roles, your deterrence missions. So yeah, that's your problem. Basically, you need a mixture of sloops, cruisers, and battle cruisers, and carriers probably, in the 1920s. I said, yeah, that's BS. It is, but it's the system we live in the UK. Alright, so I've always found the discrepancy between deck and belt armor funny. I know heavy decks have knock-on effects when it comes to design, but it seems extended exposed footage and belt would be less than deck. Think of it in terms of this. When a shell is hitting your deck, it's coming in at the end of a trajectory flight. When a shell is hitting your belt, it's hitting here. And it could be coming from closer range. So this could potentially cause more damage than necessary this. Furthermore, this has got to cover a far larger area than your belt, because your belt very rarely goes the whole way down your ship. That's what it's called, a belt. It's not called trousers, it's not called your hull, it's a belt on your hull. So it'll cover a defined area. It might not even go to full length of the ship. It might not. So in contrast, your deck armor has to cover your whole deck area, or at least that which is armored. So if I get my second camera going again, and I turn on the light, and I open up the book that we were in earlier. To the Revenge class. Now, as you can see, the belt covers here and here. But the deck armor, that covers all this space. The belt, as you can see, can be quite a narrow band. This is a good example up here. Look at all this hull, which isn't covered. It's got some reinforcements for torpedo defences going on here. Got space for a bulge. But, yeah. This is the thickness of your armour going up at various points at this plating, which is in where you've got your casemates. As you can see, the boilers are here. Now, actually, while I remember, someone was talking to me the other day about the G3s. We've got the Nelson class here, good example. You've got the turbines and the gear, the turbine spaces. Boilers back here, turbines here, shafts go through here to power the back here, and so that helps stop the heat getting to the magazines over here. And you can see magazine spaces, MZZ, all here, turbines, boilers in this space. So you've got spacing between the boilers and the outside world, there's extra protection for them. You've got a magazine aft here, which is for the 6-inch guns, so they're going to be nicely cooked. But they're in the protective area, and so, you take that for the 6-inch. You can also add in more insulation there, and you do. You add in insulation here for these magazines, but these are magazines for your 16-inch guns. Notice how they're subdivided. Hopefully you don't lose the whole thing in one go. But then we go to the G3s. Okay? Right, so they've got the conventional boilers, 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 turbines, turbines in this design. Some actually have this split round, but here they have it conventionally. But if you notice, they have a big space here. They have the magazines start and go from this in this area, but they have a space here, which is not magazine area. Also, they have magazines which go from here to here, and then the magazines which go from here to here on this for these guns. So they have spacing here for spacing between the magazines and other refrigeration and storage, and they have spacing which is sort of used at this area for protection to try and keep the heat from the boilers from getting to these, which adds to weight. So actually, this design is theoretically more efficient. But also, please note, this is why I say you could have added in a third shaft quite easily, and extra boilers quite easily, if you had just been able to been prepared to add in 1,500 more tons, or even 1,000 more tons, because it's quite simple to give this hull a little bit of an extension. You've got points here where you can do it, and you could have added you could have extended this, left the boilers there, added another set of boilers and turbines, then the magazines, and that could have been your third shaft out the back. Or alternatively, and here's what you could do if you're being really, really smart. You could have you were insisting on doing it single funnel, with a single funnel. But if you were doing a double funnel, you could of course split them up and make them give yourself slightly more security. You could have even shifted that funnel and gearing so that you could have the funnel going up here. Although that's going to be less good for your viewing position, because the whole point the funnel was back there was to make sure there was as little chance of smoke obscuring your director position as physically possible. But that is why on these vessels you get your two funnels all the way back here for your boilers driving your 4 shafts. 6 boiler rooms supplying 4 shafts. Okay. There you go. Right, and let's see who's won the Patreon vote, and then it'll be final questions before this is we end this evening. Yeah. So let me just refresh the screen. Winning of the Patreon vote. I'm just doing my own check. We're using an Excel spreadsheet. Yeah, that's fun. We have a tie for second place. Let's see what we have as the tie. I always find it annoying when there's a tie, because that means I need to factor in a third one, and we'll try and work out when I get time to put in a third one for you all. To be fair, I'll figure it out. Probably I'll turn one of the Bruships later in the month to it. Oh, frig it, I've got to prepare the ones though to cover. I'll figure it out. I'll do it when I get back. I'll write it while I'm away in Justin Craig. That's how I do it. Okay, we have got wooden walls at sea. The process of how wooden ships between 1700 to 1860 are built. I might turn that into a Bruships one like I did today. In which case it would be a different one, but it'd be working through the books I've got on wooden ship construction. So that's how I might do it. Because I've already done some videos which are around that topic, but we're okay. And then we've got what were the most serious mistakes made in World War II based on World War experience. That's another second one. And in first place we have signatories of the Washington Naval Treaty during the interwar years. What was their biggest mistake and missed opportunity? I think that's what I do. Oh, what I'll do. I think I will turn the Blackburn Maximus Wooden Walls at Sea into a sort of session like today, because I think it's been okay with a second camera, broadly speaking, working through the books, and I think that's best to work through the books. So I've got a couple of books which should cover that, and should be quite interesting to answer that one. Don't panic. I'm not panicking. I'm more a case of I do not like not delivering on what I promise, and I like to deliver a certain quality. And trying to work out how I'm going to fit quality into August and September is always fun. Thank you, Jack Ray, for all memberships. Seriously, why did the weapon class destroyer have such a short run? Because they were neither fish nor fowl. They weren't overreduced in the numbers, which the small destroyers were able to be from the small yards, and they weren't as useful as the larger destroyers built in the larger yards. And the thing is, the whole reason for building was to make use of these yards, which are intermediary yards, and frankly, it was more sensible to just build the small destroyers in the intermediary yards and build them faster. I understand and don't understand the need for maneuverability and anti-submarine warfare skills. At the same time, it feels contradictory. Submerged subs are neither fast nor maneuverable. Basically, it's maneuvering because you're trying to get the correct image with your anti-submarine warfare systems. And especially when you've got a towed sonar array and those sort of things, you want to be as flexible as possible in order to avoid issues with the sonar array. But even if you go back prior to that, when you've got directional sonar, you want to be, your primary method is not moving the sonar or pointing the sonar, it's pointing the vessel which the sonar is mounted to. Yes, you can move the sonar in later versions, but it's not as good as actually just moving the ship sometimes. Well, my brain just carries a little. I always thought about running waterline to main deck, the full length of the Citadel. No. And there are different levels of belt armor. So this is one of the things about battle when we talk about people say, "Oh, this battle cruiser has the same thickness of belt as a battleship." Yes, it may do, but it tends to cover a less area, a thinner. It tends to be a thinner belt in terms of its area of coverage, and also a shorter belt in terms of the length of the hull it covers. So yeah, it ain't a battleship level armor. It's got a battleship level thickness. That doesn't mean it's battleship level armor. It's like saying, well, it's the difference between me wearing Drax full plate body armor or me wearing, using this lovely carpet tile, a chest plate. I've got the same thickness of armor on me as Drax has. So I'm armored the same as him, aren't I? Oh, disconnect and reconnect. The Nelsons did have 1,500 tons. They were 33,500 tons because the British were trying to definitely make sure they didn't reach the 35,000 tons. If they'd been slightly more or less worried about reaching 35,000 tons, then Scharnhorst and Gneisenau doesn't get away from Rodney, and we have a very interesting different history of World War II, because if you lose Gneisenau on the race around the world with Scharnhorst, then that operation is less successful, and also who's aboard Gneisenau to get lost. It's going to change all sorts of things for the rest of World War II. Have you tried voice meter for filtering out your system noises? Not a complaint, just wondered if it's something you tried. Usually what I do is I turn my system on the silent, and it is supposed to be on silent. so I'm not sure why it was making a noise. I was asking, maybe fix the camera. The trouble is, if I reactivate it a second, this is why I'm considering the whole system of working out and finding a system which I can mount the monitors to, because really I don't have, and it's gone again, I don't have the desk space for that. And XSplit has frozen. Ay, caramba. XSplit has frozen. It's fun. Right then. Seigfried, your third prop shaft for Nelson's, would it be short and what angle would it be at? It would be short it wouldn't be that massive, but you could also get it short enough because, again, it's, now, give me a second. So, hello again. So hopefully that's working. Now, if you consider the depth, the boilers, and the whole system is in the Nelson Rodney class, and considered to the relative to where the shafts come out, and you can see where the shafts come out relative, considering the shaft points, to the rudders there. If you're going to angle that, you could probably get them to come out at a direct angle, so there wouldn't be much of an angle on it at all, if anything. Okay. Right, and last questions. Sorry, I got Gneisenau wrong. I meant a ship with potentially 2 battleships killed, assuming she hits Bismarck as well, is going to lead to a very different idea of preservation of ships. Could well do with Rodney. And Rapper like, did the RN have a ship like the Franklin Randolph? 2 horrific damage and survived. Eskimo? Let's be honest, Eskimo. Eskimo, Nubian. Quite a few of their ships received horrific damage and survived. But yeah. Right then, I'm ending the Q&A. He says, and taking that out. And changing that to live chat, so that should come up. Right, right. Thank you very much, everyone. I'd love to fix. As I said, I was asking. I'd love to fix it with something, but I haven't got the space on my deck at as that's going. And look, you already produce more book content than I keep up with. I try. Our board, the Gneisenau, when she confronted Rodney, and I was having to run with Rodney, there was Lutyens was aboard Gneisenau, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think Lutyens was aboard Gneisenau. Alright. Jack, right? It doesn't work for her. There is an issue here. I've flooded the gifts twice before, and she doesn't. I think YouTube doesn't like Melanie. I'm not sure why, but I think YouTube doesn't like Melanie 1640. I have no idea why. What has she done to upset the gods of YouTube? Is the question. Is she always that correct that she's upset them? Thank you, Inns Morrison, Paul Amos, Abzaski, David Golding. Thank you, Stafford Thompson. Thank you, Renon. Thank you, Carl van Gasberg. Thank you, Rapper Raceback. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, DJ40. Thank you, Jack Ray, Dan Freeman. Thank you, all the admins who've been on site. Thank you, Melly640. Thank you, Kieran Marston. Thank you, Edward Augustus. Thank you, Len H. Thank you, Craig Lackey. Thank you, Mega Scrow. Thank you, Paul Amos. Thank you, Crochet, Jaron Exner, Daniel Durkin, Shane Stoney. Thank you, thank you, Plains Fox. Thank you, Leslie Mitchell. Thank you, DH89. I didn't know if I said hello to you earlier. Thank you, Just Vonk. Thank you, HMS for Dunn. Thank you everyone who's watched this evening. I hope you enjoyed. Derp Squad, thank you. George Newman, not sure I've said thank you to you, but thank you. Thank you, Rev Razor. Thank you everyone who's been here. Hope you had a good time. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it interesting. It's a slightly different take. I haven't done with Bruships before, focusing on one book, but I hope you enjoyed it. And as said, I will, comment below if you don't mind if I use that for the Wooden Walls one, because I think I can do the Wooden Wall one's better one as a more interesting one, as a Sunday Bruships sort of thing, with focusing in on a couple of books and using that camera. At some point I'm going to have to get a better camera for it, but we'll work it out. And as I said, going to have to get a camera stand and things. I've actually got, I think, a book viewing camera somewhere, or rather a microscope, a proper special camera for focusing down and scoping in on stuff, which I use for actually teaching. But I only use it in October usually, so I usually lose it for about the rest of the year. But I'll go find it. Thank you very much, Sharon. Take care, and thank you to Brooke. Thank you, 96831. Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed.